Congratulations. Well, I don't know what we did. You got
Councilwoman Chandler? Councilwoman Wolf?
Here.
Councilwoman Wolfer?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Fortune?
Present.
Councilman Todd?
Here.
Councilman Shada? Absent. And the mayor is present. Okay. So tonight we have, essentially, we have two items for discussion on our agenda. Both are fairly involved, pretty lengthy. We have the mobility master plan, and then followed by the Buxton Avenue functionality study. These will be presented by personnel from Finley Warren. And if you guys could introduce yourself, please.
I'm Troy Russ out of the Denver office, and I lead our urban design and transportation practice. Tom McLaughlin, I'm in the Colorado Springs office, and I do general transportation planning.
Steve Chester, I'm an urban planner with Jordan.
Great. And what I propose, since this is a fairly busy evening, what I'd like to do is let these gentlemen get their slides presented. So while they're presenting slides, if you have a question that's really fundamental to understanding the slide, feel free to ask them. But let's try and keep those questions brief so we can move along. And then we'll give ourselves some time after the slides to have a discussion. So that's where I think we should get into the meatier questions. We'll take a break between the two, and then we'll get back to it. We hope to be done by 9 o'clock. You see if you got questions, we'll see how that goes. So, gentlemen, if we could go ahead and start.
I think I'm going to go ahead and start, if you don't mind, Mayor, just to set the stage. And my name is Laura Neiman, and I'm the project manager for both the mobility study as well as the future of the Hiawatha Gardens building, which we will not be discussing at length tonight. We will be doing so on February 11th, although we will touch on Hiawatha Gardens. I have been involved with the project for the past 18 months on a part-time basis. I'm a Manitou Springs resident for the past 3 years, and a Colorado Springs resident for 15 years prior. I have a background in both tourism and city administration, and the gentlemen that I've been working with Finley Horn just introduced themselves. Before they start with the actual presentation, I just want to set the stage of how this group was formed, and so a little bit of the background, but I will be brief. There was a cover memorandum to this presentation for this evening, and I think it's important to know that there are 3 different stakeholder groups that funded the Transportation and Mobility Master Plan, and those are the City of Manitou Springs with an investment of $50,000, the City of Colorado Springs with the same investment, as well as the Pikes Peak Cog Railway. And so what our charge is to identify opportunities and address improvements that will enhance mobility within the city itself. And again, when we use the term mobility, it's the ability to move people around. It's not necessarily all transportation related. Immediately following this presentation will be the Ruxton Avenue Functionality Study, which did, just for a little bit of background, it received a notice to proceed back in April of 2018. So that's nearly 2 years ago. And the study was paused in the fall of 2018 when it seemed likely that the solutions for Ruxton were not just Ruxton based. They were going to be solutions for the overall city of Manitou Springs that would be able to assist Ruxton, and we'll talk a little bit further about that. And so, again, a little bit of history. June of 2017, the Ruxton Avenue Functionality Project RFP was solicited. So many of the people here in the audience tonight probably know it's been a good 3 years in the making when it was first started as a discussion. Then this firm, Kinley Horn, was given a notice to proceed in April of 2018. The mobility study work group, which will be touched upon by Stephen this evening, many members, we call them the project advisory committee, are in the audience tonight. And as a matter of fact, if we could, just raise your hand if you've been involved with the project for the past year on the PAC, as we call it. Terrific, thank you so much. We engaged the Kinley Horn firm in the beginning of last year, and we have been working on the project very diligently for the past year, specifically focused on mobility. Ruxton, as I mentioned, was paused for a period of time. It kicked off in spring of 2018. And then was put on pause because of the mobility study. It was recently restarted with a number of people in this room, stakeholders, and we're here to present tonight both the transportation, mobility, and master plan. There will be numerous recommendations that range from thousands of dollars to millions of dollars within the transportation and mobility master plan. We have attempted at the conclusion of our presentation today to focus on 5 immediate recommendations, but since this is a work session, what we're hoping is to get some direction from council before we come back and present again on February 18th. Ruxton, on a separate presentation, there will also be 3 recommendations from that study with the hope we get direction from council on what you'd like to see the next time that we gather. As I mentioned, Hiawatha Gardens, which will be one of the recommendations from the Transportation and Mobility Master Plan, will have a separate presentation on February 11th based on the feedback that we have this evening. So I will conclude my comments and turn it over to Stephen Chester.
If I may, let the record show that Councilman Shady was present at 6:05. Gentlemen.
Great. Thank you, Laura, for that intro. And yeah, again, my name's Stephen Chester. Thrilled to be here today to walk you through the Manitou Springs Transportation and Mobility Master Plan. As Laura alluded to, it's been a long-term plan. It's been in the making now for a little over a year. So it's really exciting to kind of present the work of the community and our really engaged stakeholder group, and share with you what we think is a really fantastic future vision for transportation mobility for the city. So we're going to start today kind of talking through the planning process, how we got from A to B or A to Z, all the steps along the way, and the community outreach we've done throughout the entire process, and then walk you through kind of each of the individual chapters of the plan, and then most importantly, concluding kind of moving forward, what's next in terms of implementation and priority projects, and then being sure to leave ample time for discussion and questions. So, starting off, Plan Manitou is really the genesis of this plan. Everything in this plan falls under the kind of the guidance that's already been created with the community with Plan Manitou. You know, the overall comprehensive plan for the city, the real guiding vision for Manitou Springs looking into the future. So that Plan Manitou really sets the framework for this transportation and mobility study. This study, down the line can be further refined by corridor plans or neighborhood plans, but ultimately the real purpose of this plan is to help guide regulations from the city, but also, most importantly, investments, transportation mobility investments that the city will be making in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So up on the screen here is our decision-making framework, and really this was the process that we went through in order to come up with all the recommendations in the plan. Really everything you see in this plan came out of the community, whether it was a community member at a council at a work session with the community or a member of our steering committee. Kind of everything began and started with the community. We also met with a series of stakeholder groups, smaller groups of individuals, a lot of also in the room here today, represented kind of different organizations and different partners, mobility and transportation partners that we touched base with along the planning process. We also had a really engaged project advisory committee, which I'll go into a little more detail, along with an executive committee made up of the 3 funding partners. And ultimately, you all here today, we've touched some of your predecessors, but also here today touched base throughout the planning process in a couple of work sessions, and then ultimately you're going to be the ones that adopt the plan. So our project advisory committee, this is the list. I'm not going to read through everyone who was on the committee, but it was a really diverse group of individuals, and what was great is that we had great participation from beginning to end. This wasn't a group that was really engaged in the beginning that fell off. Our last meeting had the same amount of attendance as the very first meeting, and a lot of great discussion kind of in between the meetings as well. It's a diverse group too of folks kind of focused on parking, on bike advocacy, but also regional partners. So we had CDOT and the county also engaged. So the planning process went through kind of these 4 main steps. Started with a community mobility assessment where we assessed kind of what's the lay of the land with the transportation and mobility network here in Manitou Springs. That involved both data analytics, so looking at traffic counts and some cellular streetlight data, which we'll get into a little more detail, but also hearing from the community about what's working, what's not working with the transportation and mobility system. From there, we moved on to vision and goals. So where do we want to go as a city? What's our desired path when we think about transportation mobility looking into the future? Do we just want to go with the status quo approach, or do we want to be big and bold and transformative? So that helped us kind of set the stage for the scenario planning, where we developed specific scenarios for the future of transportation and mobility in the city, looking at what if we put all of our chips in the transit bucket, and what does that look like for the city? Or what if we just kind of went the same path that Manitou's been going in the past in terms of the way we've been doing investments? What does that look like extrapolating into the future? And that really helped us, with the community, come up with a preferred scenario, which we then developed our range of different recommendations and strategies based on. And our last step is actually developing this plan and working through with the steering committee, with city staff, and council here today to develop the final plan. And so we did a lot of community engagement along the way. Like I said, this plan is really a community-driven plan, and we really tried to focus on doing as many different types of outreach as possible. We didn't want to just rely on having one workshop or a couple of workshops where we want people to come to us, but we also went to them as well. So we did some pop-up engagement at popular community events throughout the summer, the marathon and ice cream social. We also did online engagement, so for those who weren't able to come to the meeting or come to one of those pop-up engagement sessions, we had surveys online, which we collected a lot of great data from. And we also did some more targeted outreach with partnering with the Chamber of Commerce on the wine festival. So everyone who came to that wine festival actually got a survey emailed to them, so we got some really great data, more focused on visitors, but seeing how they interacted with, how they got to the city and moved around the city. And so we're just making sure that throughout each step of the process, we offered a range of different options for people to weigh in on the future of transportation. So moving on to the kind of the first chapter of plan introduction, there's a lot of great information in here. Starting with why are we doing a transportation mobility study in the first place? It's a good question to ask. And it's a really great opportunity for the city to do two things, to have a long-range vision when looking at transportation mobility. We're not reacting to a bridge that failed or a pothole in the street, but this is our opportunity to look long-term about what we want as a city. It's also an opportunity to look citywide. Again, we're not looking just at a corridor or a specific neighborhood, but really looking at the entire city as an entire transportation network. And lastly, it's an opportunity to do coordinated mobility planning. We're not just looking at bike mobility, we're not just looking at how cars move through the city, but it's an opportunity to look at all of the modes, but most importantly, how all those modes interact. So what's the interaction like when you're walking to pick up the bus, or driving, then parking your car, then walking to the cog railway, or wherever it may be. So this is an opportunity to both to be long range, be citywide, and be coordinated with looking at all of the transportation modes. And so this plan really came, as Laura alluded to, kind of genesis of this really great regional collaboration. This wasn't just Manitou Springs, but also Colorado Springs, with their interest in the city, and the Cog Railway as well, all coming together to realize that we need to come together as a city to think about how we want to move around looking forward as a city. And so we didn't just start from scratch. A lot of people have told us throughout the process that, Manitou's been planned to death. Almost every community's been planned to death. There's a lot of great plans and studies that you have completed, and this is really building off of a lot of that great work. We didn't just, we did a really comprehensive review of these studies, and it all kind of fed into our State of the System report, which is an appendix to this plan as well. It's available on the website, which is a summary of the main recommendations and kind of the vision set by all those existing plans and studies. But it's also our opportunity to look at, or I alluded to earlier, is kind of the data of transportation mobility of the city, how people are biking, walking, taking transit throughout the city. And it's really an opportunity to identify what are the main deficiencies in the existing networks. What are the main challenges that this mobility plan needs to address? So that was the real starting point for the rest of the community conversation around transportation and mobility. And so we did a lot of both kind of analytics looking at the existing infrastructure, but also demographic analysis. So who lives in Manitou Springs? How do they move around? Where are they going throughout the city? There's a lot of great information, too much to dive into tonight. I really encourage you to look at that State of the System report and the summary of it that we have in the plan. Some interesting tidbits that we pulled out. Something I thought was particularly interesting is, see if it's actually on here. This stat right here, you actually see that commuter transportation, this is actually people who are driving alone, looks like, oh wow, we're doing great. In Manitou Springs, that's kind of decreasing, so that single occupancy vehicles is decreasing. But at first, we're really excited about that. Manitou Springs is in the right direction, more people are biking and walking, but that's actually due from a rise of telecommuting, so people working from home. That's not necessarily from a rise in people taking transit to work or biking from work. So we have more work to do in terms of that. And also an interesting stat we saw was analyzing, it's called Streetlight. It actually looks at your cell phone data. We don't know whose cell phone it was or anything like that. It's a completely anonymous system. But we're able to see where people are leaving or traveling through the city, where they're beginning and where they're ending. And what we learned is 25% of trips in the core downtown area begin and end in the downtown area. These are auto trips. So this is people driving from one side of Manitou Ave to the other, or just going from one side of town to the other side of town. Think about it, that's 25% of auto trips, congestion downtown, that if you get those people taking transit, walking, biking, it's an incredible reduction in the amount of kind of congestion we have downtown. So just a snippet of some of the things that we found through those data analytics. This is just a summary of some of that information. We also saw that 44% of trips originating up at the Incline and the Cog in downtown. So that's good. We heard during our community conversation, there was kind of this belief that people that are going to the Incline or going to the Cog Railway really never go downtown. They just kind of come in and out. That's not really the case. That's 44% of people using those resources, those great attractions up there, are then traveling down to downtown and enjoying downtown. But that number could be even more. So those are some of the kind of data analytics that we're tracking. There we go. So the State of the System report kind of summarizing some key opportunities and challenges that were the kind of launching point for the rest of the recommendations. I'll just read through these real quickly. Some of the main challenges we identified were the transportation network can be overloaded during peak times. Everyone knows that during those great summer weekends, it's impossible to move downtown. It's gridlock congestion sometimes. That's a big challenge that the city's facing. There's conflicts between visitors, business owners, and resident quality of life. Everyone kind of has, those three groups have competing demands of the transportation mobility system. So how do we create a vision moving forward that balances the unique demands of those three groups? And lastly, the natural environment creates barriers to non-motorized transportation. No surprise, we have some really significant hills in Manitou Springs. It makes it hard to bike. Unless you're like Nancy and an e-bike, it's difficult to get to your house if you live up on the hills by walking or biking. So that's a real challenge, a unique challenge that Manitou faces. But there's some emerging technology out there and ways we can overcome those challenges. Some of the opportunities we see is, there's a real opportunity to increase non-auto trips. Most people drive in Manitou Springs. Most people drive to Manitou Springs, and once they're in Manitou Springs, they drive around Manitou Springs. So by just reducing those non-auto trips, there's a real opportunity there. Manitou Springs is a unique city, and so we really think we have an opportunity to address some of these challenges in a unique way. It's really embracing what makes Manitou Springs such a great place to live and work and visit. I think we can apply that to our kind of recommendations moving forward. The world-class attractions here, the Incline, the Cog Railway, Quai de la Winds, the list goes on. Really, for a small city, you have a really large regional influence because of these amazing destinations here. So it's really an opportunity to capitalize on those for the benefit of both the visitors, business owners, and the residents. And we're in a really cool, well, as transportation geeks think it's a cool time to be a transportation planner because you have these evolving technologies out here. Shared mobility, in Denver we have scooters everywhere. I'm not recommending, that's the case here in Manitou Springs, but there's all sorts of new technologies out there, there's smartphone data and ways to move around the city and find information about the city. That is a real opportunity that Manitou can capitalize to address some of these challenges. So from that, we moved on to kind of the vision phase of the planning process and also came up with a set of guiding principles. So I'll walk through those right now. So as I alluded to earlier, the vision is really pulled directly out of Plan Manitou. We asked the community, is this vision for transportation mobility from Plan Manitou still resonate with the community? Is this still what you see for transportation mobility moving forward? And we heard a resounding yes. So that was great to hear. And so that vision from Plan Manitou for transportation mobility reads, our community has a safe, multimodal transportation network that balances the needs of our residents, visitors, and businesses, complementing our natural, environmental, and cultural history. So I highlight the residents, visitors, and businesses, and that balance that you need to have between the three. There's going to, for some decisions will maybe, be more to the benefit of residents, and some decisions and recommendations may be more to the benefit of visitors. But as a plan, as a holistic plan, we really think we struck a balance between balancing the unique needs of those three kind of different stakeholder groups here in the city. So from there, we developed a set, with the community, developed a set of guiding principles. And so what are guiding principles? It's an overarching philosophy that guides the plan and its priorities throughout the planning horizon of plans for the next 20 years. These serve as the basis of reasoning and action and direct investments and policies. And so the individual recommendations may change, the strategies may change as things are implemented, and as the plan is working through its lifespan. But these guiding principles remain the same. These are kind of the each of the recommendations was crafted in a way that addressed each of these guiding principles, and I'll walk through those right now. So the first is rethink how we move around. This kind of goes back to our analysis during the State of the System report, where we simply can't go down the path we've been going down in terms of everyone drives to get everywhere in the city. We simply, Manitou Springs, based on its unique topography, we can't widen our roads. We're not going to build our way out of kind of that congestion issue we have at Manitou Avenue and those peak times in the summer. So the only way we're going to address that challenge is rethinking how people move around the city. And that's, physically what mode. Are they walking, are they biking, are they driving, taking transit? And so one example kind of in the built environment of what that could be is rethinking Hiawatha Gardens, as Laura alluded to earlier. This is a great asset that the community owns. And what can be the future of this site? Specifically think about rethinking how we move around. An example of that would be rethinking it as a mobility hub. We'll go into a little more details of what exactly a mobility hub means, but that's a way that we can get people out of their cars before they get downtown and onto other modes of transportation, onto a safe and convenient, engaging transit network, bicycle share, shared parking, and shared cars, and other modes beyond just your personal automobile. And so the only way we're going to rethink how we move around is redefining how we use our streets. Our streets today in Manitou Springs are really dedicated for cars. And we have sidewalks on some of our streets, but generally they're designed and operated for single occupancy cars. When transit uses those, bikes use those, but they're really designed for the car. And so if we're going to rethink how we move around, we need to redefine how we allocate that space on the street. So there's a street in Manitou Springs that's, you can see there's on-street parking and travel lanes and really narrow sidewalks. But the future of that street could be a wider sidewalk, providing opportunity for people to bike and walk safely, and maybe rethinking parking into opportunities to create landscaping or enhanced transit stops, or potentially little parklets and ways to expand that pedestrian to create gathering spaces. And so that's really what we mean when we say redefine our right of way. We're not moving the curbs out, we're just redefining how we allocate that space. And lastly, reimagine the public realm. We hear loud and clear from the community that Manitou Springs is this unique place, this cherished place, and we want to make sure that any of the transportation investments that we do moving forward don't work against that, actually enhance the sense of place and uniqueness of Manitou Springs. And so we think that there's a really, all the recommendations in here as they're implemented have a real unique opportunity to create really fun, engaging, unique spaces in Manitou Springs. So an example of that is we identified as this Cannon Avenue and Charles Parker Place. This kind of triangular intersection, and what if we shut that down in the summer and create a plaza, and those businesses can kind of spill out onto the street and create a really engaging pedestrian realm. As this is downtown Manitou is one of the most kind of engaging, vibrant pedestrian places in the entire state, if not country. So let's just celebrate that and enhance it even more. Okay, so as I mentioned, those guiding principles really set the stage and help frame our recommendations. So now I'm going to go into our recommendations, going mode by mode. So we're going to go through kind of walking, biking, transit, auto, and kind of high level go through the recommendations. Leaving time. This is where we want to get into the nitty-gritty details. So I'm just going to introduce them, and we can, in the discussion, if you have more focused questions about any of these specific recommendations, we can get into those details. So first of all, I want to talk about how these recommendations ended up in here. We kind of went through this planning cycle of life, you can call it, starting with the state of the system that I just went through. Identifying the challenges. Every recommendation in here addresses one of those challenges or opportunities identified in the state of the system report. But there's a lot of different ways to address those challenges. So we want to make sure that those challenges were addressed in a way that align with the vision in Plan Manitou. Plan Manitou is holistic, talks about lots of different aspects of the community, historical resources, environmental considerations. And so every recommendation in here aligns with the vision in Plan Manitou. And there's some recommendations that we heard and ideas from the community that do address those challenges identified in the State of the System report. However, they don't align with the vision in Plan Manitou. And so if those are going to be recommended moving forward, we'd have to kind of go back to Plan Manitou and have that discussion over again about what are the real values of the community. And lastly, the guiding principles help us kind of refine our recommendations. There's lots of different ways to address some of these challenges, and there's different ways that we can do it that align with Plan Manitou, but there's only a few that do it by rethinking how we move around and redefining the right of way and reimagining our public realm. So, losing my voice. We have 6 different chapters in the plan that talk about kind of each specific mode recommendation. I'll walk through those again. I'll just go high level so we can leave more time to get into the details. So first is transit. We heard loud and clear from the community that the way we're going to kind of move forward, the mode that we want to invest the most in, both dollars, but also kind of our enthusiasm is really embracing transit. And so the way that we're going to do that is by creating what we're calling mobility hubs. And these are kind of really clear and engaging transit stops where you can have a seamless shift of modes. So you can drive at some of these and park there, and then there's going to be really clear places to wait for the bus with really nice shelters and real-time information when the next bus is going to arrive. There's also, they're really well connected to other modes. So you can also get maybe a bike there to then, bike throughout the city or whatever it may be. And so we're recommending mobility hubs, both short-term and long-term. So the immediate mobility hubs is at Hiawatha Gardens, the one right in the middle there, and up at the top of Ruxton at the Incline and Cog Railway. There's more longer-term mobility hubs recommended in the urban renewal area, and an idea to have one up at Higginbotham Flats that's connected down to downtown with a gondola or a chairlift or something like that. Kind of a big idea. You can get into a little more detail about that, but something that the community is really interested about, so we want to make sure we capture that. And so the only way that the mobility hubs will work as a concept is if we have enhanced transit service connecting those mobility hubs. And so we've recommended both new transit routes, opportunities for new transit modes like a gondola, and enhanced hours and frequency. So not only kind of where the bus is going, but making sure the bus is coming frequently, so you don't even have to look at a schedule. The bus is just going to be there. We also identify that there's some areas of town that aren't currently serviced by any transit at all, and so we have there's opportunity to expand into a called a call and ride service. So in that Crystal Park neighborhood area and some of the other neighborhoods, maybe you get on your phone and a bus can, more of a circulator bus can come and pick you up and connect you with this more high frequency network. There's also less infrastructure type of recommendations, more, how do we get people to shift their thinking and take the bus more? So transit amenities, so making sure people know where the bus is through enhanced wayfinding and information kiosks, enhanced stops and shelters, you're not waiting in the rain for the bus, and enhanced rider incentives in education. So is there a way to partner with businesses where instead of offering free parking, you offer free transit passes for people maybe commuting from outside Manitou Springs? Most people work in Manitou Springs, actually commute from out of the city. So moving on to parking, another big discussion point with the community. We think the first way to address parking is by improving communication. And that's already happening internal at the city. So that is kind of two main strategies there is signage and real-time wayfinding. There's really simple signs that the city can invest in. The technology can be fairly complicated, but to the someone driving into the city, they can quickly see, oh, there are no spots available at the top of Ruxton before they even get anywhere close to Ruxton. So that will signal to them that they should seek parking otherwise, not drive all the way up Ruxton, circle around Lakewood Park, and then drive all the way back down. That's what we want to eliminate. So through improved signage and communication, that can go a long way to eliminating those unnecessary kind of circling trips. There's some stats out there, more for like a downtown, like downtown Denver, where 30% of all congestion in downtown Denver is people circling looking for parking. So if we just make it easier for people to find parking, we're already moving a long way towards solving our congestion problems. There's also online information, so there's some great examples we've researched, like in Estes Park, for example, where people on their smartphone can quickly look at where all the different parking resources are in Manitou Springs and see how many spots are available at those different resources and the prices at those different lots. And this is all before they even arrive in Manitou Springs. And so that's the first step. Then we think improving demand management. So there's not necessarily a shortage of parking in Manitou Springs, it's just how it's managed can be done in a more efficient way that actually can lead to more efficient use of all the parking resources. There are some places where we're recommending increasing the supply, which we'll get into, but before we do that, we want to make sure that we're managing the parking as efficiently as possible. So that's the look at where we're managing parking. There's parts of the city where the parking isn't managed at all. It's just you can park there, I guess technically you can't park there as long as you want, but there's no one saying, not 2-hour parking or something like that. And then there's the price of parking. There's some areas that you have to pay for parking. We think that that could be expanded and that price can change based on that location. So instead of having kind of one price throughout the entire city, those places that have the most demand people should pay the most money for those premium spots. And then, that's a typo, enhanced hours and frequency, skip through that. So enhanced supply is the last recommendation, where we're actually saying in some critical areas that we'll need to enhance or increase the parking supply. And that's at those mobility hubs. And so we're not saying enhancing or increasing the supply at the top of Ruxton or in downtown, but at the Hiawatha Gardens mobility hub specifically, but also in those two long-term mobility hubs at Higginbotham Flats and in the Urbanville area. So streets, this is our actual right-of-way, and we have a lot of opportunity to kind of improve the efficiency and the safety of our streets here in Manitou Springs. And so first, we identified some areas that this community is already working on and doing some neighborhood traffic calming. Just making sure it's safe and convenient to walk in your own neighborhood is pretty important. So that's primarily focused in the Crystal Park Road area and also in that area kind of along Becker's Lane. And then we're recommending doing an intersection safety audit. So we just identified, through the Ruxton project, we did a walking audit, walking the corridor, and there's some intersections that have some really some challenges when it comes to intersection safety that can be addressed in a very quick way. Like it's literally just some overhanging trees that need to be trimmed to improve the sight lines so cars can see the pedestrians crossing the street. There's some other intersections that have, unfortunately, some more resource intensive fixes to them, like maybe introducing some different pedestrian crossings and some other things. But before we recommend any of that, we need to do a real kind of look at every single intersection in Manitou Springs from a safety perspective, making sure it's safe for all users. We're not just talking about car on car, but making sure cars can see pedestrians and bikes can move through the intersection safely. And then we want to look at enhancing the efficiency and access of our roadway network. And that's through regional intersection improvements. So that's really focusing along US 24. We think there's some opportunity to, especially not necessarily today, but we're talking 20 years out as the region continues to grow. Some of those intersections will become more congested, more challenged, and so potentially introducing a traffic signal at some of those intersections that are kind of access points into the city. And then lastly, local intersection enhancements. And these are, looking long term. There's, do we need an additional signal at some of these intersections or a roundabout to help improve the efficiency of these intersections, especially during those peak times, to make sure that cars and transit and bikes and pedestrians are all moving efficiently through the city. Moving on to walking and rolling. So this is really the pedestrian recommendations. Really focused on three main recommendations: increasing safety, extending the reach of the pedestrian, and improving the pedestrian experience. So a lot of those improvements, looking at the streets, will also enhance the safety of pedestrians. So again, doing that intersection safety audit and implementing the key recommendations from an audit are really that first step, because the intersections are where most of the unfortunate conflicts happen, or most accidents happen, or crashes happen. We've identified some key streets that have sidewalk gaps that are actually used today by a lot of pedestrians, and we think, especially looking into the future as more people are moving through Manitou Springs, could really benefit from having pedestrian infrastructure, like a dedicated sidewalk, particularly on Ruxton, but also Crystal Park Road and further east on Manitou Avenue. We're recommending introducing some signalized pedestrian crossings. And so that's a crossing where a pedestrian can hit a button and flashers start flashing and they're able to safely cross the road. Those provide more predictability for both a pedestrian but also a motorist, knowing that where pedestrians are going to cross and they'll do so in a safe manner. But those can also be timed in a way during those peak times when you have so many pedestrians crossing the road everywhere downtown, which is great, but it's really starting to choke the auto network and the transit network. Buses can't go through downtown because pedestrians are crossing everywhere. So there's a way that you can time those crossings. Someone hits a button and maybe every 30 seconds or every 10 seconds, the timing you can adjust, but it makes it a way that we can, instead of just one person crossing the street, it can be 10 people crossing the street, and then cars and transit vehicles can move through that intersection. So that's will enhance safety, but also the efficiency of the entire transportation network. In terms of extending the reach of the pedestrian, that's really what's the quality of that walk. I mean, providing a safe place to walk is really the most important thing, but you want to make sure that no one's gonna, even if you have a safe sidewalk, if it's a really nothing really to see, nothing really to do along that walk, very few people are gonna actually do that a longer walk, especially if we're saying recommending expanding parking further away from downtown. We want to make sure that walk from Hiawatha Gardens to downtown, or from even as far as the urban renewal area to downtown, is as engaging and vibrant as possible. And so that's through urban design recommendations, so enhancing kind of the street furniture. Some of that great work we've done on, or you've done on Manitou Avenue relatively recently. It's some of the biggest thumbs up we've heard from the communities that streetscape on Manitou Avenue. If we just take that and expand it kind of further east and west along Manitou Avenue, that'll go a long way in extending the reach of the pedestrian. But then there's other recommendations like enhancing the tree canopy, providing shade. It really goes a long way to making people feel more comfortable walking a further distance. And public art, Manitou Springs has some of the most creative people that I've met, so really working with that creative community to expand the public art in the city really creates a better walking environment that actually extends the reach of the pedestrian. And then people are willing to park further from downtown and walk further distance. And then improving the pedestrian experience is more to do with the actual physical infrastructure. And that's through some creative options that we've laid out, such as shared streets. And so in that dotted red line, re-envisioning Lover's Lane to potentially be a shared street where it's really bikes, pedestrians, and cars all kind of have shared priority over the entire street. You know, someone would feel comfortable just walking down the middle of the road because cars know that they're more kind of invited guests to that kind of street. You know, that's kind of typically how it's used today. You know, we had so many meetings in Memorial Hall here and just saw so many people walking and biking on Lover's Lane. So let's really kind of build on that existing asset and create a real vibrant kind of pedestrian space. We also have in Manitou Springs this really cool network of public staircases that can really be true partners in enhancing pedestrian mobility throughout the city. A lot of people don't know where those are, don't know if you're allowed to walk on those, if that's someone's house. And so really embracing and enhancing that network of public staircases will go a long way to addressing some of those challenges we identified earlier in terms of that steep natural topography. And then really embracing pedestrian plazas and parklets. It's maybe taking out a parking space here and there to create an extended street cafe or something, or bike parking. Or it's maybe not even taking out a parking space, but it's some of that remnant space where it's too small for a parking space and no one really knows. Some people park there and get tickets, no one really knows what to do with it. Let's just take over that space and really create a space for pedestrians where really we can celebrate what makes Manitou so unique.
Can you say shared use path?
Oh yeah, sorry, I skipped through that. So shared use path is like the creek walk, for example, I can't believe I've gone this long without saying creek walk. But all the great work that's done with the creek walk. So a shared use path is not necessarily just for bikes, not a bike lane, not necessarily a sidewalk just for pedestrians, but something where both users feel comfortable on that space. And it's kind of really embracing Manitou Springs kind of trail network. Let's bring that trail network, up into the mountains, bring it into the city, and create this network of trails and shared use paths throughout the city to be partners for bike and pedestrian mobility. Thanks for bringing that up, Nancy. So with biking, we are recommending creating a network of connected facilities. There's really no bike network to speak of in Manitou Springs today. There's a bike lane that just kind of ends. There's great regional connections to Colorado Springs and Midland Trail, but we think there's a real opportunity to create a more connected bicycle network throughout the entire city. And that's through the creek walk and shared use trails, but also mobility boulevards. So that's taking a street we've identified here on the map where cars are still able to drive on, but it's clear to the car that this is a space that is prioritized for bikes and also pedestrians. So that's through signage, that's through paint on the actual street, and through some other kind of infrastructure upgrades on the actual street. But it's not
low-speed
yeah.
shared technologies.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's for
In low-speed shared technologies like scooters, there's a whole category of transportation that's growing all over the country, either private or licensed. The cities can license a user to use it like scooters, or you'll see private electric scooters, electric bikes. But there's a speed that is not car speed, it's bike speed. And so these aren't called bike lanes, these are called mobility lanes, so that these shared technologies can also safely use those facilities and not use a sidewalk.
So we have mobility board, also climbing lanes. So just maybe you don't need a bike lane going down the hill, but a safe place for bikes as they move slower to go uphill. So identify some big hills in town where those can be an asset. And then also encouraging the city to be forward-thinking in their policies and regulations. And so rather than getting blindsided by some of these new technologies that just show up on your doorstep one day, creating a policy so really Manitou Springs helps guide that conversation with those shared technology providers like Uber and Lyft and Lime and I don't know, the list goes on, Bird and Jump.
Keep going.
Yeah, I can. It's kind of like
5 more.
you're really challenging me now. I could do it.
But getting ahead of that,
Yeah.
and because they have a right to use your right of way. And if you don't have clear licensing rules and vendors, you're going to get competition in Denver, and they're going to take over your right of way, maybe in inappropriate spots like the sidewalks. So a lot of cities get ahead of that, set those policies up, and say, all right, we know you're coming. This is where you park it. This is how you use it. You can actually set the license here, and it's only one vendor serves your community. Right, and so that's what we want you to do, is get ahead of the micromobility challenge that will come.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, communication is critically important. We alluded to this earlier, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but embracing kind of these next generation technologies in terms of real-time information on signs, but also creating a network of pedestrian signage, or finding bike signs, or finding that's we're not advocating for sign clutter. We don't want more signs. We just want a coordinated kind of sign palette. You've already been working on that with the kind of temporary project. It's kind of taking the lessons learned from that and creating that citywide. So I want to now jump to moving forward the implementation chapter of the plan. How are we going to make this all happen? What we first did is create this convoluted diagram that shows how the city makes decisions, transportation-related decisions today. Everything. We can go into more detail about this, and it actually took us a while to get this right, and still might not be right. So I'm really looking forward, since you are at the top of this diagram, making sure that we got it right. But in terms of who is talking to who has actual decision-making power versus just more a recommendation role versus more an advisory role. We also have these special districts. What is their role in transportation? We're not recommending change to this, but we just want to make sure it's transparent and everyone in the community knows how these decisions are being made. In the plan, we've also kind of gone through with the city of what are funding sources for implementation of this plan, both internal to the city, but also regional funding sources that can be partners in implementing some of these recommendations, and which of those funding sources work best with which recommendations. Identifying regional partners that will be partners like Metro Mountain Transit and some others that will be true partners in the implementation of this plan. And also took all these recommendations and put them into a phasing kind of a Gantt chart, so you can see which should go first, which is more long-term. This is all, going back to the very beginning, a coordinated effort to make sure that we're not recommending all these great transit recommendations without enhancing the pedestrian rail. Because once someone gets off the bus, they're then going to be walking. So we want to make sure that all of these things are happening in concert. So we've also identified priority projects, or what should the city start working on, once this plan is adopted, that will really help start kind of kickstart the implementation of this plan. And those are the real-time communication and advanced wayfinding that the city's already starting to work on, and some of that work definitely should continue. Really developing what is the system that the city wants to use and where those signs should go. We've recommended some ideas about where this makes the most sense for those signs to go. The Ruxton Avenue improvements already has $1 million dedicated to it for the final design. And Ruxton and Manitou Avenue are really the two main shows in town. And so getting Manitou Avenue is working really great, at least from a streetscape perspective, and some enhancements we're recommending, but it's well on its way. Ruxton needs that same level of love. The Cog Railway Mobility Hub, definitely something that, that creating those two mobility hubs. So it's not only the Cog Railway Mobility Hub, but it's also the mobility hub of Hiawatha Gardens, making sure those, really creating a real dignified transit experience at both of those locations, providing all the information that people need to move throughout the city, and really celebrating transit at those two locations. And then those pedestrian crossings that we mentioned, those timed pedestrian crossings, really will enhance pedestrian safety, but also help with the efficiency of that transit, connecting those two mobility hubs. And so these three highlighted here, which is great. The city's already working on that. We already have a great project working at Hiawatha Gardens, a great committee meeting working on what's the future of that site. The city's already internally working on the real-time communication, and we're working on kind of the conceptual design for Ruxton Avenue. And so these two other ones are the other projects that we're maybe alluding to. Maybe we should start thinking about the short-term implementation of the pedestrian crossings and the Cog Mobility Hub.
And then don't want to forget that the other thing that's called out that doesn't have a cost associated with it is just that additional regional collaboration and communication with Colorado Springs, with the county, with CDOT, just ensuring that everyone's on the same page, and as decisions are made in one city, it makes sense with the other, and you piggyback on whatever you can possibly piggyback on, just to make life easier for yourselves, make bills cheaper, and just make a more regional kind of attractiveness for visitors.
So there is a cost that is FTE.
Yeah,
That's questions that obviously Denise and council need to think through. But that regional coordination does pay for itself in that you become more competitive for regional money. And so that regional money, if you have regional attractions, you are eligible to compete. But just paying attention and coordinating that regional effort will pay dividends down the road.
This is my last slide, then I promise I'll shut up. We want to make sure that moving forward that we have a good sense of, as the plan's being adopted, if we're moving in the right direction. So we've developed a set of metrics that tie back to our guiding principles that we're recommending that the city track year over year to make sure that we're heading in the right direction to help implement the vision as outlined in the plan. And so for Rethink How We Move Around, recommending tracking transit ridership, and we'll make sure that's increasing. Resident and employee mode split. So how people, that's going back to how people are moving around, we'll make sure that people are starting to bike, walk, take transit more than just drive. And average daily traffic decrease. So that's again the ADT, that's those trips internal to Manitou Springs. Let's think about or hope that through the implementation of this plan that will begin to reduce. I don't know what's going on. So redefine how we use our streets. We want to track, is the city building more sidewalks and trails? Hopefully that's increasing. Transit revenue hours, so just kind of the total service hours that transit's running in the city. We want to see that increase. The public perception of safety. There's a difference between crash data and how does it feel to move throughout the city, how does it feel to bike? And so that,
And so just, it's not necessarily vehicle related, it's non-vehicular modes are some of the most underreported, right? And
Close
so
calls.
their sense of safety is as important as crash to try to deal with that. So you start to see a mode shift.
So the way you track that is through a community survey. The city's already doing that, adding a couple questions that talk about the perception of safety. And then parking utilization of mobility hubs. We want to make sure that if we're investing in these mobility hubs that people are using them and parking there. Sorry about that. And lastly, reimagine the public realm. This is where we want to see an increase in the space dedicated to pedestrians, bikes, and parks and parklets. Primarily that kind of leftover space. Let's see that begin to be reimagined into unique spaces for Manitou Springs. The visitor trip capture, so tracking the number, that goes back to that number from earlier, tracking the number of trips starting at some of those key tourist destinations. We want to see them then going downtown after. We want to see them kind of going to the COG and then leaving town, but we want to increase the vibrancy of downtown. And then resident quality of life. Again, that can be captured through a community survey, but ideally through all of the recommendations of this plan, we continue to see Manitou Springs as a world-class place to live. So with that, I will stop talking, open it up to questions, comments. Feel free to go back to any of the slides, and happy to hear from council.
Council, it's open season on questions. Who'd like to kick off?
That's a good start. We appreciate it.
This is unusual. Well, Mr. Miller?
At a very high level, the executive committee described this as the three funders. What is their position on what we just reviewed by organization?
Laura is amazing.
And members are here.
Right, I think all three are representative. Brian from Colorado Springs, and I did see Ted come in, and we have approved the presentation this evening. So we are in agreement of the recommendations. The priority of such and where the funding's coming from, that is open for discussion, and that's why we're seeking some input from council so that we present at the general session on the 18th, that we're presenting at your direction. Because there are limited monies. In the general fund, there's a carve out of $250,000 to implement something that is recommended for the mobility study. That's not a lot of money, but there are grants available, and there are also regional solutions, and there are potential PPRTA and so forth, but that's what's in the general fund specifically.
And a quick follow on, with respect to the incline that was briefly mentioned, the increase of usage, what's the position of the executive committee on the incline and capacity control and things like that that are discussed now for a long time?
You're going to cover that in the Ruxton?
Yeah, I was about to say that dives a little deeper than a citywide master plan, but the Ruxton study has specific performance expectations, because that's a destination on that corridor, and there's a series of steps that address it. So we will cover that in Rockstead. But I don't know if we just give Ted or Brian a chance to talk about the process. And as vested partners, if you mind just speaking on the process and general outcomes, so council understands your position.
Do you want to come close to the
Right, yeah, if you can,
microphone?
please come up, introduce yourself and
And-
speak in the microphone.
You just sit, go in my chair.
Good evening, Brian Batuli. I'm with the City of Colorado Springs Mountain Metro Transit. And I've been on the executive committee for the mobility study and part of the PAC that oversaw the study. And you know, we contributed to keeping all these gentlemen employed for the last year. And we're also a funding partner for the Ruxton functionality study as well. So we're very pleased with the process. I mean, the amount of outreach and public engagement was astounding. I mean, they did a tremendous job on that. So the public had numerous opportunities to get involved and say what they needed to say. So we're very pleased that everybody had a chance to listen and to be engaged and provide comment. You know, as Mountain Metro Transit is concerned, we love being involved with what happens here in the community, and I think we proudly like to think that we've been helping with the parking, you know, management over the last several years with the two shuttles that operate in town here, and we'd like to continue that relationship. You know, the funding for implementing a lot of the recommendations that will be worked out. You know, this as far as plans go, this is a tremendous first step. I mean, very far-reaching, and I think that's what's needed actually to try to meet some of the challenges that we're up against. And I'm also a resident of town here, so even though I don't have a hat on, I'm wearing two hats. And you know, I see all of the issues that I'm working on professionally with these people here on a daily basis. And you know, I just think this is a tremendous first step to moving forward and trying to implement some great solutions to some really tremendous challenges.
Thank you, Brian. Ted, do you want to?
Questions for, I'm sorry, we have questions from the police.
No, I don't have a question. I just have a comment. Is that okay?
Sure.
My concerns are, and maybe this should be addressed later when we get into the Ruxton details, but the extent to which we're eliminating parking spots so that we can create either more room for bicycles or more trees or whatever it is. I'd be really concerned about doing that, particularly depending on the location, because if we're reducing the parking for visitors, that doesn't seem too problematic because presumably we're going to have parking lots for them to go to. But if we're eliminating parking, for example, in Ruxton or on Manitou Ave, where residents park their cars who have no driveways, that seems like a much bigger concern. And I don't know what, if any, solution there would be to the reduction of those parking spots, but I don't know, maybe we should wait till we get into Ruxton, because this is all general, and I'm concerned about specific parking for residents who don't have any other place to park. I also was curious to see what, if any, decisions have been made to reduce the vehicles going up Ruxton for the COG and for the incline. I understand there'll be signs telling you there's no parking up there, so don't bother coming. That may be a step in the right direction, but I just wondered if there was anything more creative or sophisticated we could explore to create some kind of incentive for people to bus up there or shuttle, rather than driving. I also understand that the Iron Springs Chateau was at least at one time interested in offering their 40 or 45 or whatever it is spaces in their lot to the city, and didn't know if anyone has considered that. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but I haven't heard anything about it. And I haven't heard anything about purchasing other potential land to use for surface parking, but maybe that's not part of the discussion yet. I also, just in my own mind, and I've never explored this, but just thought, gee, we've got these huge parking lots for the 3 schools in town that are empty when school is not in session. Christmas time, which is when we have a lot of traffic, and summertime, we have a lot of traffic. So I thought it might be worthwhile looking into some kind of partnership with the school district, where perhaps they'd be willing to rent space to us and have our shuttles go to the parking lots for the schools as additional potential use, because right now it's just sitting there getting dusty all summer, Christmas and spring break and all of that. And then as a question, I missed it. Somebody, I think you said there was $1 million already allocated to something. Was that right?
Ruxton Design.
To the design for Ruxton.
Yeah,
Okay.
taking the concept and laying it out.
Okay, that's it.
So those are great comments, and I think just between the two being the citywide mobility study and Ruxton, I think the parking loss here is, we need to balance that loss with quality of life. And if I'm a resident that has on-street parking and no other choice, and that goes away, that goes against the goal of the mobility study, right? Balancing quality of life and making sure that stays there. So we're trying to balance. This plan sets guidelines to which Ruxton should follow. And I think that's a great reminder that we're here looking at the visitors' needs, the businesses' needs, and the residents' needs. So we can't lose sight of that. And I think as we talk about the principle, and you look at projects that come out of this study, be it a parking study, be it Ruxton, be it another, that we have to make sure we're balancing this. So I think it's a great reminder that it's really important that we can't lose sight of any one of the 3 users. And I think parking is a great sign of that. So that we need to make sure our principle reinforces the quality of life. I think reducing vehicles on Ruxton from a management plan in this, because Ruxton will address that, because it's following the rules here. We have expectations that there's trends of decreasing average daily traffic. And so this, as a citywide mobility study, sets that policy guidelines. So when you look at projects that come out of that, what are the trends? Are we accomplishing what the plan says? So I think it's in great alignment with your expectation here. The Ruxton will get very specific, but not this mobility study. Iron Springs, that's a Ruxton issue we can talk on about. That's not a mobility study. And then the land strategy, I think the school parking is really, really important. We're saying put additional parking, concentrate that at the mobility hubs, right? That's Higginbotham Flats, Hiawatha. That's where additional significant parking needs to go. It's not going to happen overnight, and nor will it likely deal with huge events, public events. So getting a partnership with the school district for the giant events, or while these things are under construction, when you build Hiawatha Gardens, what's your plan? And I think these are types of things to work with the school district that we should remind Hiawatha Gardens as it goes forward, but also talk about special festivals. So I think all of these are wonderful on-target concerns that the mobility study needs to give guidance to. And if we don't mind, Mayor, if I may, can we have our other financial partners speak, and then we can go around the rest of the council?
Yeah, you have Mr. Johnson next.
Good evening, councilors. My name is Ted Johnson. I'm the Assistant General Manager at the Cog Railway, for those of you that I haven't met. As far as this whole process goes, it's been eye-opening for me. I remember when we first kind of kicked this off and being, kind of informed of what the goal was and having to be a part of it. I've been in the railroad industry my whole career. I've never done traffic studies or anything like that. And so I was personally somewhat skeptical of where this was going to go and how it was going to end up, but having attended pretty much all but one meeting, I've really kind of changed my thinking. And some of that goes to, as I've kind of talked with these guys over and over again, I was living in Washington, D.C. before I moved to Colorado Springs, and I was forced to change the way I thought about moving myself around that city. And it just was not open to cars like where I'm from in Oklahoma. And, that was a big change of thought for the whole year that I was there. But now it's translating into this project in terms of what can we do to think differently in Manitou. And not only that, but we have to contend with the fact that most of our visitors are from Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, places where people want their car and they want to drive straight to wherever it is they're going. And that's not an unreasonable expectation, but how do we set the expectation ahead of the visitors arriving in Manitou that, that's your expectation at home, but for what we're trying to do as a city, that can't be your expectation here. And not in a negative way that, says, we don't want you coming here, but in a positive way that says, if you do what we kind of lay out for you and how we choose to lay that out, you're going to have an even better experience because you're not going to spend 45 minutes circling town looking for a place to park. And kind of to Councilor Wolf's question earlier about parking technology, Deputy City Administrator Cheney and I have been working very closely in terms of the technology conversation that's out there. And, one of the things that we kind of figured out early on is the city's technology needs and our technology needs are similar, but there's also differences. And so one vendor that might work for the city may not work for us. But one of the things that we've found in all this conversation is the ability for those technologies to talk to each other. So even if we go with separate vendors, we still have the ability to get our vendors in the same room and say, okay, you need to be able to communicate on your sign down at the Highway 24 exit that there is no parking at the Cog Railway. And to take it a step further, one thing that came out of this study for us is we are looking at a couple different ticketing systems for when we reopen, and the ability for those systems to take people's data and communicate the best way possible to them prior to arriving. Things like, if you have a ticket for, let's say, July 4th, the morning of July 4th at 7 a.m., we can automate through these ticketing systems to send a text message to everybody that has a reservation, that's given us their cell phone and opted in to receive information from us. We can send them something at 7 a.m. that says, you have a ticket for the Cog Railway today. Before you come to Manitou, click on this link that's included in the text message. That will take them to a parking site and list out all the lots, how much it costs to park there, and then, availability. And so obviously at 7 a.m., everything will probably be wide open. But then, for specific train departures, maybe 2-3 hours before their train departure, they get another text message. Hey, check this link again. Make sure you know where to park. There is parking at the Cog. There's not. There's no parking at Hiawatha. Go to Wichita, things like that. But one thing that, we can't do is at the end of the day, we cannot control whether somebody takes a trip up Ruxton Avenue or not. All we can do is provide them as much information as possible to make an informed decision. Yes, ma'am.
What if you told them you can't get on the train even with your reservation and your ticket unless you give us your bus pass that we know that you took the bus?
That would imply taking away our parking.
Well, to the extent that the parking is full.
I think that's going down a whole nother rabbit hole that we haven't.
Yeah, I guess if the parking is already full, then.
Yeah, I mean that. Well, yeah, I mean there's that's getting into a whole lot of if then you should have a bus ticket type deal, and we can't literally control every person that's out there. There's going to be people. Through these ticketing software companies that we've spoken to, the kind of the general consensus we get from all of them is right out of the gate, we're going to be somewhere between 60 and 70% of people who will buy a ticket online ahead of time we'd obviously like that to be 100%. You know, just like when you buy an airplane ticket and you get your boarding pass, you know, not everybody gets their boarding pass 24 hours ahead of time on their phone. But, you know, so we're right out of the gate looking at somewhere between 30 and 40% of people who are just going to show up at the COG without a ticket, expecting to get on it, because the general understanding in the United States is I can just show up and get on a train. And that's pretty accepted on, you know, public transit in terms of Amtrak or RTD up in Denver or any other major commuter line. But the COG is unique in the fact it's a tourist attraction. And, you know, we have a limited capacity. And during the summer, you know, that capacity can sell out, you know, frequently. Now, granted, with our new cars that are coming, and, you know, there's probably going to be some excess capacity initially. I mean, we're not expecting to fill every seat right out of the gate. Now, if we do, that's great. That's a win-win for everybody, because there's more people coming to Manitou and spending tax dollars here. But, you know, it's just a matter of educating people as much as possible ahead of time. And yes,
Oh, Ted, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't be getting into solutions here, but if we do end up with a mobility center or mobility hub down at Hiawatha Gardens, what about having a satellite ticketing office at that location?
so it would actually be more of a kiosk. So we could work through if it's actually, you know, a manned ticketing office. But from the, so I've been over to Switzerland once as part of this project to review, you know, how other COG railways over there operate. And they're more in the public transit realm over there and not tourist trains. But it's amazing, any little town that you go to that has one of these COG railways over there, there are ticketing kiosks all over
Okay,
town.
so it's already in your bag of tricks that you might end up doing.
Yeah, and you know, there's things like, you know, who's going to own the kiosk, you know, because if it's at Hiawatha, we want it to be, you know, more of a city-centric kiosk to buy things for other attractions, or get a, you know, maybe go on there and you make a reservation at one of the restaurants downtown, you know, so it wouldn't be necessarily a COG-specific kiosk.
So I mean, so just keep on track for the mobility study. So I want to thank both Colorado Springs city staff and the COG staff for their collaboration. I mean, their willingness to work and share information, it'll really be shown in Ruxton. We would never have had some data and potential solutions without active involvement of partners. And the COG is a very important partner, and the city should hear that. They've been absolutely sharing every aspect of these studies and have been very helpful. Both thank you, Colorado Springs and COG Railway, and your staff, obviously. So I wanted to say that, but I want to stay on focus and give council staff or council time to ask other sort of general questions. A lot of these specific concerns about the COG are addressed tangentially through Ruxton, but obviously their specific plan also goes through your conditional use permit and many other things that the mobility study hopefully gives guidance to under these 3 guiding principles. And our philosophy working with the community on some of these solutions was our 3 sort of masters of the business community, the tourism and visitors, and the residents, and balancing. So what the citizens came up with, not to be punitive, but try to be incentivizing. And so instead of sort of saying you can't do something, you can, but we're going to do everything we can to encourage you to do it in a way that's very livable within the city. And we can go through that in the Ruxton study. But are there questions from counselors that we haven't heard from?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, council, if we have more questions specific to mobility study, I'd recommend we maybe discuss those for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so. We can take a break and get on to Ruxton. If we kind of start out, if we get a little ahead of schedule, then we'll have a little more time maybe at the end of the evening to ask questions, having heard both the mobility study and the Ruxton study. So, questions? Okay, then I would propose that we take a 10-minute break, come back, and we'll start in on the Ruxton functionality study and push on. About 10 minutes.
Well, and maybe, because there's this movie, so that's subject. Oh, yeah. And I was like, oh, it was like, Okay, I know. You guys have coffee. Okay. I think it's great. Now, I like it's very different I don't want to mention this tonight, because I want to mention it during you guys to work.
Yeah, I mean, I was just telling Julie that we already.
Yeah. Yeah. Start the design process with the money from those steps.
Some plan of action.
There's not a lot back
I think they did a really good job.
Yes, yes.
I know, should I send that talking to John? And I'm really worried about.
And what I didn't get, it was all went well and that's nice, is specific direction on what to come back with.
Well, just ask that.
Okay, okay. Because,
I think it's great.
okay,
I want to, of course, I've always thought it was great.
Right.
So I'm so. Anyway. Yeah.
thank you. Adopt them.
Adopt is right.
Right. We'll see. Okay. That's great.
Don't say that, even though it's true. You're still on dry line.
Well, I spent a year in Hawaii. We had a medical apartment. We're
Oh, was it?
Yeah, so it's already. And then I realized. That's how I was like, that's no, but that's not. No, but sometimes I'm like.
Just like your.
Break it up in these two, just say there's kids, means a lot. So we're hoping to priority
Can we get started again? We still have plenty of work to do. We'll take our seats. Incidentally, there are some small notepads and pens outside for, outside the door. If anybody in the audience would like to write questions down, we may have an opportunity to get to those later tonight, depending on how things go. If not, there's a box out there. You can leave the questions in the box, and we'll compile those and make that part of the presentation. So we'd like to get started on the Ruxton corridor portion of this. So, Laura, would you like to have the floor?
I'm going to defer to Kyle McLaughlin to take over the presentation on the Ruxton functionality study.
Perfect. Again, I'm Kyle. I am the on-the-ground kind of nuts and bolts person on the Ruxton functionality study. And I want to start with highlighting what Laura had talked about initially, that this project had started or got a notice to proceed in early 2018 and had some work done during the 2018 summer. And some of that work was parking, data collection, just general field walking and data collection, and kind of background understanding building from the consultant part. And then it was paused there in late 2018, kind of to wait for the mobility study to catch up.
And as Laura said, we had restarted it in, I believe it was October of this last year. So a lot of my presentation is focused on what happened since the restart, the outreach since the restart, but I just wanted to note that, and there was a steering committee meeting back in 2018 and such, but this is all focused on this recent activity. So let me make sure I figure out how to work this. I don't use, there we go. Okay, so the agenda, I'm going to go over some of the input from walkability audit, the community workshop, the design charrette, and then we'll get into some of the different solutions that we've come up with in response to the outreach that we've done, and kind of have more of a robust discussion, because the point of this presentation is really to get the direction from council on the preferred solution and which direction the Ruxton alternative should head in for the final design. So to highlight, what we just talked about, everything we do in Ruxton and hopefully everything we do in future corridor plans and neighborhood plans should have that same lens of using the guiding principles from the Transportation and Mobility Master Plan, as well as the vision and principles from the Plan Manitou. It just needs to be in the background of all of the decisions that we make and all the aspects of any solution we kind of can think of going forward with. And remembering that rethinking how we move around, redefining how we allocate or how we use our streets, and then reimagining how we design the public realm and what we actually use it for. So starting back with the walkability audit, in November we had 2 different groups on, I believe, a Thursday. There was like 25 or 30 people who walked around. Mayor, I think you were a part of that group, I wasn't able to make it, but it sounded like it was really great, robust, conversations of just trying to figure out what's going on in the corridor, what's working, what's not working, what are the issues, kind of trying to open eyes and figure out what we're really here to fix.
So just real quickly, we had 2 groups. One started at the top of the mountain, we took the bus up, and they walked down to the church. And another group that I led, we started at the roundabout and headed up, and we met at the church and reflected at the church on some of these key findings. So what are those? Yeah,
so the positives that kind of everybody agreed upon is that Ruxton's popular space for a lot of people doing a lot of different things. It's very vibrant and it creates that sense of community. Just being there, you feel like you're someplace unique. And it really does celebrate that unique flair of Manitou Springs. It is the culmination of the entire city is kind of represented there in that unique corridor. And it also represents many of the historical features of Manitou Springs. There's different bridges, there's walls, there's buildings, there's attractions that have been there for 100 years. So we just need to keep that in mind that those are positive things that we need to feed off of with the future of Ruxton. Some of the issues that were identified are that the roadway itself has some restricted accessibility. There's some issues with some sight lines, there's issues with vehicle movement and kind of just space constraints of the corridor. There's a lot of competing land use desires, from commercial little core district there at the bottom of Ruxton to a really kind of more dense residential to an attraction-based top. So there's a lot of different land uses in a relatively short corridor. People believe that there's a general lack of safety, as both pedestrians as well as motorists, and just trying to keep in mind that the main purpose for any project is to make sure everyone feels safe and everyone is able to use the facilities that we're building for them. The right-of-way lacked order. It kind of seemed to shift here and there, and the sides of the right-of-way are defined essentially by the buildings and by the walls that are intermittent here and there. It just seemed, to the participants, it seems like there's a little bit of a lack in order. And then lastly, the significant visual and physical barriers, including poor ADA access and curb ramps,
hanging trees, just for these utility, the utility poles being, one of the major ones that I haven't mentioned yet.
This picture here, I think it kind of sums up that process so well, because in this picture, beyond the really handsome guy in the middle, we have someone representing the fire department. Councilor Todd is there, so kind of representing city council. We have a couple of residents of the Ruxton corridor, one of which you can't really see, but she's pushing her child in a wheelchair, so we got to experience the corridor. Stroller. Sorry, stroller. I saw a wheel, she was sitting in it, along with some other residents of the corridor, I think, and Karen was also on that group. And so I thought, like, the conversation we had, hearing from all the different kind of constituents and all their competing demands and hopes and dreams for the corridor really sums up kind of what the challenges of this project.
Yeah, great. So then that same day, actually, there was a workshop for the community, and we came out to basically an open house with a number of boards that laid out what we see as the existing conditions. There were everything from crash data to speed data and parking data. It all kind of was laid out there, and then there was a couple of different breakout sessions that happened and the two main activities that went on were again, what's working well in the corridor and what's not. And then they also played a kind of a cross-section game where you've got these puzzle pieces that represented the width of any given thing, whether it's a travel lane or a bicycle lane or just a standard sidewalk, and try to fit it in the way they thought that deemed appropriate, and come out with some great ideas. Some things that may or may not have been represented at the end, but it helped frame what people were really thinking was important to make sure was included in the corridor. And then the what's working well and what's not working well, it matched well with what people in the walking audit had found. The same things that were positives for the walk were the things that people were saying were positives in the open house.
So before you change the slide, some of these fonts are a little small, and if you're watching, if you're in broadcast, I just want to point out some of the things that the committee wanted to preserve and versus revise or change. So the commercial activity down at Ruxton is sort of mid-corridor. The limited access on the corridor, there's not too many driveways on that corridor, which was appreciated for the parking specifically. Access to nature with the creek and the visibility and exposure to that, also with what's at the end of the corridor with the Barr Trail. The beauty of the natural and built environment, the slopes, the historic walls were very much valued. And the creek itself, it's very unique in terms of how the creeks and the bridges run next to it. Some of the challenges, obviously the number of users in that corridor, between the incline, they were worried about the performance of transit and is slow up the corridor, is it really an attractive alternative? Obviously the lack of pedestrian safety was the biggest thing in terms of clarity for pedestrian trails. As you get further up, there is no sidewalk and there's tight spots, and it's very uncomfortable for a lot of the residents, the visitors, and everyone involved. Congestion at the roundabout, and when the COG releases, how does it distribute through the corridor? Speeding concerns, we did a speed study, and their differentials, you have a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, and we saw speeds averaging up to 28 miles an hour. And that differential is the primary concern, because pedestrians and vehicles behave differently and what their judgment is. So if a pedestrian thinks a car is coming at 20 and it's coming at 28, it's going to get to them a lot quicker, and it's fundamentally perceived as unsafe, and it's actually unsafe. So we did those studies, and it was reflected by community input. And then obviously utilities are a concern on the corridor. And access, this was the ADA circulation access for all users. Pushing a stroller, being elderly, the lifted and heaved sidewalk where you have it. So those are just concerns. So I wanted to make sure the community on the TV and you all can see those. Kyle didn't hit those.
Yep. So then we took all that kind of background information, and we went and did a full day design charrette where we had the community, we had stakeholder meetings, we asked people, over a course of 8 hours to just come and give us your input. Let's draft things up, let's put things on paper, see how it works, talk back and forth, have a conversation as to, can we do this, does it fit with basically a scaled aerial. And we had four different drafters that were kind of responding to every comment that the citizens made, and came out with, this is just a couple of the different solutions. I didn't want to put all of them in there, but these 3 examples are of the core corridor, just a couple of different drafted options that are physically, from the drawings that they had that day. We had 4 different sections, which I'll get into next, but I just wanted to highlight that this is, literally commenting, then drawing, comment, and then draw. That's what we did for most of the entire day. And we did that for, like I said, 4 sections, including the top of Ruxton up at the COG, and trying to figure out some things that we can improve up there. So at the end of that day, the key takeaways were reduced vehicle demands. We've heard that already, in the previous discussion. We want people to get up there somehow outside of the vehicle dependency. That's the preferred, end of the solution, is get people up there some other way. Improve the pedestrian experience and compliance. So that means both the ADA, access, and give people the infrastructure that they need, as well as let's try to get people out of the road. There's a lot of sentiment that we don't want pedestrians just walking up Ruxton. There's a lot of roads in Manitou that's perfectly normal. It's perfectly fine because it's safe and slow, but Ruxton just doesn't seem to be one of those that we want to encourage people to walk on.
And then compliance also is vehicle compliance to pedestrian laws. And a lot of times what we found in the walking audit and our assessment, it's not that we are inherently evil. We're all motorists, and many of you live on Ruxton, and you're not deliberately not complying to the pedestrian rules. A lot of time the geometrics of the road itself prohibit you or make you aware that a pedestrian is present so that you could comply. And so this is sightline issues and others. So when we mean compliance, yes, it's pedestrian bike compliance, but also motorist compliance. And a lot of this is physical design. This road was not designed for this many pedestrians, this type of transit, this number of vehicles. And that's really why we're here for the functionality study.
Yep. And then the last takeaway is we want to keep it unique, keep it Ruxton. Essentially, retain the corridor and the community character that exists. It's not, we don't want this project to come in and make it clean flush and make it a suburban road. That's not the intent of, basically anyone's imagination. So keep the character of the roadway. So next, I'll just run through the different sections that we had the drafters up, and just highlight some of the different constraints that each person kind of had to deal with as we were drawing up different solutions. So section 1 is the section from Manitou Avenue kind of up through the end of the commercial district, commercial core.
Just for orientation, Manitou is to the right.
Yep.
The COG Railway and Incline are to the left.
Yep. So the key constraints of this first little section are that there's a lot of parcels that are built all the way up to the sidewalk. So the likelihood of expanding it is already, it's already not there, and anything we do has to basically remain in the same location that it's at. We can play with some things, but it's already, maxed out side to side with buildings for much of the section. There's a poor intersection design at Osage. A lot of people were complaining that there's a, as you come down Osage or as you're trying to go up Osage, it's just got a weird angle that it comes down at, and it causes some sightline issues that people would like to see cleaned up. This is one of the highest volumes of pedestrians on the roadway because of its location near Manitou Avenue and the presence of the commercial buildings. There's just more people inherently that are in this section, so we need to be cognizant of that. And then the commercial land itself kind of raises the demand for parking. We have the baseline need for residential parking throughout the entire roadway, but with there being additional commercial here, it kind of you have a high turnover rate, and you start to have a different type of demand on the parking itself. Section 2 goes from that end of the commercial up through kind of where it turns straight after the Church Hill, or after the Church Drive corner. The key constraints here are the slope stability of that south hill. There's some, the big stretch of this roadway here is is where there's the degradation and the erosion from that southern side. And so that is a big concern that will probably need to be, almost certainly need to be addressed with any solution. Poor sight distance around the Church Street corner. So in particular, coming down Ruxton, there's parked cars along most of that corner, and it creates additional sightline issues for people trying to turn on to Church Street or off of it. So just need to keep that in mind.
The representative from the fire department said they respond to the most crashes at that curve right there.
Yep, and that's what the crash history had showed. It had a high value there in Church Street and just east of it. Access and parking needs by the church itself.
Not only the residents, but the church.
Yeah, not only the residents, but the church itself. It has a different kind of parking need than most of the rest of the corridor, so we need to keep that in mind. And then Ruxton Creek in this location along that curve pushes up right there within 5 or 7 feet of the edge of the sidewalk. So that's another constraint that if we start to look at anything, we make sure that we highlight that there is the creek there. We need to be celebrating that, as we've already mentioned, but it does pose an additional concern or constraint. Section 3 is the straight piece through where Ruxton splits. So this area is kind of highlighted by, it has Dead Man's Rock or curve or wall, however you want to say it, but where the pedestrians no longer have any type of sidewalk. They are on the street, and there's just no physical infrastructure for them to be on. So we wanted to highlight that the rock and the wall themselves create that spatial constraint that we need to kind of work through. Ruxton Creek, again, as it crosses over underneath Ruxton Avenue, it stays real close to the roadway for a good little distance, but on the south side this time, and that is a constraint. There's many locations in that stretch that is eroding and starting to have, I don't know if I would want to park my car where some people do. The width of that bridge itself is very narrow, so that's a constraint. There's very unlikely that you would ever get parking or additional infrastructure on that bridge without having some kind of expansion, so it's kind of set in its width. The houses east of Pilot Knob are very dependent on on-street parking. There's a housing complex and several other residential homes that have no other option, that they're forced to be on street. So we need to keep that in mind. And then again, we've got another intersection that has really poor design because of the curve, because of the slope, because of just the natural topography. Pilot Knob has that same kind of issue that Osage has on the other side. And then the last section is up the one-ways and the COG area. The constraints are that there's a high amount of conflicting movements between modes. Pedestrians, vehicles, people are trying to get across the road, people are trying to access transit, people are trying to go up the incline. There's just a lot of competing needs again up here there, where people are not only trying to go walk along it, but trying to cross it itself. Queuing lanes from vehicles trying to park at the COG create kind of that congestion. If you kind of have to wait for somebody to turn into the COG, or have to wait for a vehicle coming out of that parking lot, or somebody coming down from the Bar Trail, they start to really queue up, and this is where the congestion really starts to build up for parking access. The existing transit stop has very poor accessibility in terms of if you are a transit user and you want to go someplace other than essentially the Iron Springs, you need to go up really steep hills. Some of those hills on Ruxton Avenue are 18, 19, 20%, and they're extremely inaccessible to people in wheelchairs, to me, I suppose. But yeah, it's just it's a really long distance away from many of the attractions, and it kind of poses a modal split issue. You're just not likely to use it if you're coming from out of town and you know that that's the issue. And I already hit on the slopes of terrain. So that was all the outcomes from that design charrette. Next thing I'll go through is the different solutions. So what we try to do is kind of provide a range of solutions that include, kind of keeping it as is, making improvements here and there, to drastically changing it, and that's what we're kind of here looking for advice on, is where in that spectrum do we land when we start to look at the future of Ruxton. So solution one is improve the existing conditions. This is undergrounding utility. It's providing that space that's there, but that's kind of already used by the utility poles. We keep the existing curb locations along almost the entire corridor, just kind of reconstruct in place. We'd remove a few parking spaces here and there, replace with just empty spaces or a plaza space or landscape, whatever it is. But these are the spaces that are kind of essential to safety. So around that Church Street corner, one of the places we suggest those parking spaces really should not be there for safety and sightline issues. And there's a couple of other spaces throughout the corridor that we think should just, almost no matter what, be taken out because of safety concerns. And that, in our estimation, that's 10 to 12 spaces, depending on how you want to look
And
at
it could
it.
be less. I mean, it's a fine scale, but that's an order of magnitude what we think it could be.
Yep. And then the last bullet is cog mobility hub options. So all three of these, we want to highlight that, kind of looking back to the mobility hub, mobility master plan. We want to improve that transit stop up at the cog. We want to make it more realistic that people from out of town, out of state, people like me are going to use that transit stop. So we've got a couple of options, and we just, throughout all three solutions, we want to say that is, kind of incorporated with any solution that we want to go forward with. Solution two is strategic north parking. So we would introduce the minimum of like an 8-foot wide trail on the north side of the roadway. And that we would suggest moving the parking to the north side to provide like a protected trail, essentially. We would have a parking and landscaping protected trail that just provides that further sense of safety for whoever's on the trail.
In all senses of this pedestrian enhancement, the first alternative doesn't really introduce alternative modes of travel other than the mobility hub at the top.
Yep.
The first alternative is just improve pedestrian space where the utilities are gone, otherwise clean up the safety, and you're done. This alternative says, no, it's time to introduce an alternative mode for bicyclists and pedestrians to join the vehicles and utilizing the corridor. It uses the north side because of the solar plow, the sun. The putting it on the south side made no sense from a winter maintenance perspective and local usability. It's an undue burden on city resources to keep a southern alignment open. But this alternative looks at that.
Yeah, and this is a great time to mention that this is where our discussions at the charrette were kind of we went back and we said what makes sense, what can we really do,
corrected sense.
What should we really be looking at, and that's where some of this has come from.
And for instance, on this one, is at the charrette, we really wanted up on the one-way southbound or eastbound coming down from the college. We really thought from an experience perspective, putting it on the south side closer to the creek was a better experience for pedestrians. But in all reality, because of right-of-way locations, parking demands, the creek's location, you don't see it on that side. We do not recommend that. We recommend going on the uphill side, and we can walk through those in specific thought. And just one moment, if we're going to introduce a sidewalk or an enhanced trail on the north side, the reason parking is being shifted up there is we feel less comfortable with that sidewalk against the moving traffic. And so the parking space, be it empty or full, gives us a 7 to 8 foot cushion between that sidewalk and trail experience and the moving traffic that would be coming uphill. So that's why. But in all cases, does it stay immediately there? No. We have to look at the design, the driveway locations of everybody. The intent is to try to do that.
Yep, and then to
you want to?
I have one question.
Yeah.
Does solution two assume undergrounding utilities?
Yes,
All
all
three, yes, they build on each other.
Yes.
Great question, they build on each other.
Yeah, so that, the great point.
I have a question, what's a charrette?
A charrette is
It's a
basically
little-
a day-long,
So
conversation.
just, it comes from the French word for little cart, and it comes from the Beaux Arts School of Architecture. When the students were asked to submit their drawings, they would actually jump on the cart and rush to finish it. It was the most collaborative moment in design. So translating that to modern day planning is you try to get everyone together and do a collaborative, because more eyes on any one thing is better. It takes a village to make a great design. And so the profession of planning and architecture have now coined that term for very interactive community workshops.
And purposely kind of short, because you get this
Yes,
iterative
the
activity.
intensive ideas.
Thank you.
Just on the utilities, your base case is all underground is extremely expensive. What about the option of all utilities on the south side of the road? Because everything is pulled today, it's just a question of you have poles on both sides.
So
I think that,
through this, I think we're gonna get a Goldilocks solution, right? These aren't the three answers. What our goal today is to get an order of magnitude of direction, right? The final design, that $1 million can really communicate the realities. We can give you order of magnitude costs, but it's the final design that would make those decisions and final coordination with utilities. What we clearly heard from the public was an expectation to bury them. And as costs get presented, council will give direction to the design team to execute that. But we can only get so much information at this time. But I think that's a potential solution.
and I would highlight that, we also kind of have that as a base case because of some of the other desires of the city and as you said, kind of the desires of some of the community members, that, if you were to put them all on the south side, maybe we lose the opportunity to make improvements to the water lines or something. You can double up on the rewards if you do it all at once, right? But as Troy said, there's obviously a huge cost. That would have to be something that would work through later on.
So the purpose of this study is to get a design intent. It ranges from 0 to 30% if there's a survey. So it's less than 30% because we don't have a survey. But it's conceptual design, to which then council would work with the final design team to make the very specific decisions and budget decisions. But we will give you an order of magnitude cost, both of burying it or just simply relocating it. So you can make that decision. But right now we don't have that.
You say loss of approximately 20 parking spaces for this particular solution. So how many are there, and did you guys do the calculations for how many are needed for residents?
So the loss of 20 is simply a geometric loss. So it's flipping the parking to the other side, and because the north side has more access points and more, built in a little bit of off street here and there, that's where that loss of 20 comes in, just from simply flipping it to a more accessed side of the roadway. We've done, simple calculations of the amount that the residents need, and we went through the corridor and tried to highlight those houses and residents that do have, no other option. That final count of how many exact spaces you can lose, the maximum you can lose to still provide everything to the residents, that's something we don't have, and that would be a final design.
And we would recommend that be a scope item in final.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we do know is the safety aspects takes approximately 10 to 12. Getting this fully implemented as conceived here gets approximately 20. Now a lot of those 8 extra spaces, because even the safety spaces are going to be near some of these more sensitive homes, right? And then it becomes a parking strategy. Do we ask someone to walk 100 feet further and make sure we're reserving specific spaces for specific unit? That all can be determined in final design. But we do know, even with safety projects, some of those homes are going to be impacted. The intent is to avoid it. And I think the only way we truly avoid it is through additional information. So as you write that scope for the $1 million design, you put strict parameters. Because this alternative is not meant to change the behavior of the parking pattern for the residents. It's meant to make it safer and work with the COG to reduce traffic going up it. And create a pedestrian corridor where the first one doesn't create that pedestrian corridor.
I'll just finish out the other pieces. We also would suggest, I guess, in the same vein, that any non-critical, non-residential needed parking spaces be converted to other uses, whether it's landscaping or plaza or anything like that. We think that this solution is kind of that maintain the exact amount that the residents need. And that's it.
So, potentially limiting paid parking.
We would,
Potentially,
yes, yeah.
In exchange for other character-giving
Sure,
things, because
yeah.
every parking stall, be it any stall, is what's driving the trips on this corridor. Anything up in there, you can't just blame the COG. Everything in there, and we do see some overutilized parking spaces that may be a third or fourth car. So there's a conversation that this study can't have, but the design effort should have before you make that final decision to clarify, because we don't have those uses. The intent of this is not to negatively impact the residents' experience.
Oh, I just had no idea what you meant, that last sentence about overutilized parking spaces.
Well, there's cars with ounces of dust on them that you see from their turnaround and utilization. Those aren't being turned over. And so the question would be to the city's parking policies on how you let the residential permit go. Are these cars that are needed for the daily success of their lives, or is the third or fourth car of home? That's not our decision. We're saying some of those spaces are turning over fast, which means those are residents that are using it every single day. There's other spaces that aren't. And our study can't be exact enough to say which are which. And so we're encouraging, as you go into final design, that you do understand which spaces are desperately needed and which spaces aren't. Because you manage the parking permit program. And so that should be done collaboratively with the final design effort. Because we don't want the final design effort to take out a resident needed parking.
Yeah, I think,
We don't.
I think
And we don't have enough information to clarify which parking stall is which.
I think it goes into the definition of need, right? It's that third vehicle. Is the vehicle being used? If not, what's the need?
And is that the best use
Is
of
that what
public
the city,
land?
yeah, is that what the city should be?
And that's a decision you need to make.
Right.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Sure, please.
So if I only drive my car on Saturdays and Tuesdays and the rest of the week it's gathering dust by being parked on the road because I don't have a driveway, that's not a need?
No, that would be
That's for
something.
you to determine.
Yeah, that would be something for
It's
council.
lower utilized, it's a less important parking stall because it's not being turned over as quickly, but that's for you to decide and give the designers that direction. It's not for this study to decide. What we're saying is we need to create a pedestrian and bike corridor in addition to safety. That's all this is saying. We're trying to minimize all parking impacts, and right now, from the data we've collected and the data the city has, you don't have enough information to address your concern. Because we agree with your concern. The mobility study says improve the quality of life on that corridor. So we're not here to punish residents. What we need as a part of the next phase of the study is a more accurate parking study so that the designers can do it.
Yeah. And council has to kind of, at some point, draw that line in the sand. Is it, the car hasn't moved in a week, or is it the car hasn't moved in 3 months, right? That's that
And that's for
decision.
you to determine, not us.
Right.
Yeah, when we did the walking on it, it was a month after it last snowed, and there were cars with
Still snow on
there
it.
was snow on it.
And if I could just add here, there is a state statute that I believe we follow as a city, which is 72 hours, and that applies to RPPs as well. We don't enforce on that,
Right.
but we could. We just don't right now. So that is one way of dealing with that, just so you know that 72-hour limit
Same conversation.
is same
Perfect.
conversation. It is a state statute. We do have it in our municipal code as well. We just aren't enforcing on it.
So there's going to be trade-offs with option 2. Option 1, safety for a few spaces. We don't think there's trade-offs. We think that can meet the parking needs of the corridor. The second one, you're starting, do we want to create a pedestrian corridor up and down the street? Do you? Well, then there's consequences. Now you need more data so you can make that decision. Are the consequences worth it?
I said I was going to go through my bullets. I didn't get through my bullets. I apologize. Thank you. Good conversation. The third bullet here is that we would say the south side has a minimum of 2 feet for a landing.
If there's parked cars.
There's some locations along this corridor that if you, again, it would go to final design, a council decision, a communication of what's the most important aspect of any given cross section. Is it the 8 foot for trail? Is it the 8 foot for parking? One of those kind of has to give up, at some points in the corridor. And we're just saying that at a minimum, no matter what, you need to give people a landing to stand at and wait for traffic to get to the other side. As a, not meant for people to walk up and down. It's not a sidewalk. It's a landing spot for people to move across the road. So that was alternative 2.
Does this option have the block crossing at the end of the trail?
Yes, good catch, Stephen. So the first option, we were saying, sidewalks on both sides, don't necessarily need any crossing. This second option, we say that we should probably, since we're building a trail, let's make a crossing somewhere near Spring Street that accesses the Inman Trail and gives people the recreational access that maybe they're on Ruxton to enjoy. As well as the roundabout. We propose in this solution and in the next that at the split where Ruxton becomes 2 one-ways, we think that there is enough space to do a roundabout there, and that would, in our mind, serve to provide a little bit better access to that corner and potentially to that residence. But we think that it also could provide an opportunity as like a last stand. We assume all these have advanced wayfinding, and any vehicles going up there have seen that it says no parking or sees that it says 1 parking. Then when they get to this roundabout, they took the chance and thought they could get to that 1 parking spot. And then there's a sign that says, nope, you were wrong. So here's a little turnaround for you to go away and find some other park.
It's not a full roundabout like what you see on Manitou Avenue. It's
Right.
a mini roundabout that private vehicles can make and negotiate that turn. Fire trucks can't make that turn, the bus can't make that turn. They have to go all the way to COG. But the goal here, as Kyle said, is reduce the number of cars at the COG because there's so many pedestrians up there. It's a last turnaround point for a lot of private vehicles. So there are some right-of-way impacts, but we think it actually improves access to the property owners. It also slows traffic down.
Yep.
If we're trying to deal with that 8-mile-an-hour speed differential of 20 posted, 28 actual. And so the mid-block crossing and the roundabout give us traffic calming abilities also, not just traffic benefits, but pedestrian bike safety benefits.
And then, the final point, we have heard some concern that this will encourage people to go up and test it. We don't think that that's the case. We don't think that having a roundabout is going to, not a whole lot of people drive the country looking for roundabouts. We may be the exceptions, but it should have no impact on, if people are on the road, they're already going to be on the road. And this is just to keep people out of that heavily congested, a lot of vehicles, a lot of people, the transit area. We want to keep them out of that if they made the decision to come up erroneously.
Does the roundabout impact parking at all?
Not there.
It wouldn't here. Nope.
There's no parking.
Okay.
Yep. And then solution 3 is kind of the let's go all in on non-automobile. So we'll make a 10-foot minimum wide trail with some landscaping and streetscaping along the entire thing on the north side, again to be in the sun and make sure that we capture as much of that natural snow removal as possible. Improve and widen the south sidewalk because now we don't have to worry because we've removed most of the on-street. The only on-street spaces that this option would keep are the ones that there's space for, or down there maybe near the core, of Manitou Avenue. But this is all in on non-auto. We would, with this solution, we suggest that the city continue to look for parcels, that may be more expensive, but that they can turn into residential surface lot. There's a couple of light teal here that are, candidates, yeah. So some that people have come forward and said, hey, I'll sell you my property. You know, it's gonna cost, but I'll sell you my property for residential parking. But that's what this solution is no more on-street parking, all in on making this an experience, making Manitou Avenue match Ruxin Avenue, essentially.
Yeah, this is the,
bring all the bookmarks.
this is the one that most matches the aspirations of what we heard from the community.
Yep.
And what I mean by that, in the 50-year aspirations, we can't get here today, but this shows you where the community wants to go. And so over time, do we come up with an alternative that doesn't preclude this from happening? Right? We know this can't happen today. We know of the impacts and the concerns, but over time, this one best reflects the aspirational goals of the community outreach we had, both for the mobility study and Ruxton. And so this is more of how can we work towards that? This, if you want to do it now, there's probably a huge, what the heck are you doing to our parking? But over time, you can be strategic. As parcels become available, do you work your way towards this one? So just we're not crazy, and we know the parking impacts on this. But this is the one that changes the complete dynamics of the corridor that we think matches the livability goals of the residents along Ruxton, the economic achievement, place-making characters of the historic town, and the tourism of downtown and the Colorado. So that's we're not proposing this as an alternative. This is meant to be proposed as the aspiration.
Well, yeah, and
I mean, you could go for it. It's
So,
certainly not coming
yeah.
out as our recommendation.
yeah. So unless it's the direction of council.
Right. Yeah, that's not our.
So, you know, the other positives for this are this provides you all of the space on the north side. You can have all the pedestrian plazas, you can have all the transit amenities, you can do streetscaping and landscaping along the entire corridor, add as many trees as you can fit into the entire length. This is, you know, everything about, you know, non-auto as you could possibly get.
And as land uses change, because all buildings eventually need it, there is legal non-conforming uses up there, and they can self-correct themselves over time. So the land use will solve itself through legal non-conforming uses. I mean, we had a 112-year-old railroad, and now it's going through a CUP, right? Every land use goes through this. And so that is not an immediate solution. It's a change over time. But if this is a long-term goal, this is certainly what we heard from the community.
Yeah, just reminding, you know, remembering that this is, you know, we're going through this undertaking. We've got the $1 million for the design. This is the first time in 100 and some years that this roadway will be designed. Is, you know, so think, what does 100 years look like from now? We just have to remember that these are monumental decisions that will, you know, outlast every single one of us. Just, you know, remembering why we're, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you keep saying this is what the community wants.
Yep.
This is what the majority of people who live on Ruxton want, that they can't park on the street
This is
anymore?
what the majority of the
I'm
feedback
only
we
talking
heard
about
from
the
study.
community in terms of all the people.
We don't have a statistical
Anyone
relevant
who
survey.
is, you know, this is of
Pardon
the
me?
people
I
who.
missed that answer.
We don't have a statistical relevant survey. What we're telling you is from the feedback from the participation, this is the majority of the solution that the participants in the study effort prefer.
How many of them lived on Ruxton?
A lot.
A lot of them. Yep. We have,
And we're not here to, we're trying to communicate what we heard through this process.
Okay, yeah.
And we're
I'm
not
just
saying this
trying
is
to
phase one.
Okay.
Right.
Let's
sorry.
Well, I just have one question. In this scenario, does this also include a local traffic only? So in other words, if we move to this direction and we figure out how to accommodate the people who don't have drives, as an example.
Right.
And is this suddenly Ruxton as a local traffic only?
No. Now, let's transition to the last element of this,
Yeah.
is the transit hub.
Yeah, sure.
Because it feeds right into your question.
Thank you.
Yes. So, as we mentioned, the section 4 in the design shred, and that, you know, kind of the other piece of this that all these have is that mobility hub. So, if you remember back, I had, you know, like, this is a long time ago. I had, we drew up all these different solutions, and we again went through
several iterations of talking with the landowners, talking with the city, talking with, people, trying to see which one of these we can do.
Transit alternative.
How can we make a mobility hub happen at the top of the Ruxton and serve the needs of the community, the desires, make it more livable for the residents, and kind of keep perpetuating some of the master plan desires. And we've kind of fallen out with two alternatives because many of the other ones have weeded themselves out for one reason or another.
So before you get started, the two alternatives and the assumptions behind them is one alternative, just like the parking alternatives, we're not taking private property. And so all these solutions, the public street, the parking on public street is public right of way. And so that's a key difference here. So this first alternative is that don't take private parking solution. One that is implementable and it's not dealing, taking out private land.
Yeah, so alternative one is improve the existing conditions. So initial cost estimate, which I can kind of give some details as to how this number was brought up, but is 150 to 200,000 depending on the investment that the city and the stakeholders want to make. Some pros of alternative one are it retains existing conditions. People are used to it. It's there. Let's keep doing it. Pros are walkways, as kind of highlighted. It's the dark piece in the center that can't zoom in.
No, I'm just showing maps.
Yep. So we propose to build a more appropriate walkway. There's no sidewalks right now except for going across the Iron Springs up to the incline and one tiny little section of sidewalk. So let's build at least a sidewalk. It's probably slopes. We're not going to be able to get to them, but let's give the pedestrians the dedicated space so that they know where they're supposed to be going.
And if you remember during the SHREP, we tried to have it closer because this is about 4,000 feet from the COG. And that's why the current location isn't great. But if we moved it closer, we're actually on Iron Spring Chateau's property.
Yep.
And it affected their parking stalls and we couldn't reflectively get their land back. And it was deemed as not that viable minimum solution. And so this is basically cleaning up what we have and giving it not necessarily an accessible route, but a more accessible route.
An identified
It's not
route.
accessible, but it's more accessible than what we have today.
Yep.
And those variants are alternative sidewalk configurations that we've worked with the COG. These probably require easements, but not negatively impacting private property.
Yep. And then so the cons are it doesn't improve the slopes hardly at all. There's a little bit of improvements you could make with some easements on the COG lot. If you were able to lengthen the sidewalk, you can smooth the slopes a little bit, but not anything significant. And we and also highlight that this does require concrete work over that existing bridge. I don't know the conditions of that bridge. I don't know. If we showed that it works, you can put it there. You're restraining the street that's actually there right now. You would remove some of the dedicated asphalt for vehicles and build the sidewalk for pedestrians. And there's no parking impacts. That the other, I suppose that's a pro in some cases, but there's no parking impacts to the existing conditions.
And that's, the bus stop is where it is today.
Yep, that's
This
just
is the exact location.
Um,
With a dignified stop,
Yeah.
weather protected, significantly improved pedestrian experience, but the distance isn't shortened.
Yeah, so that's where good chunks of the estimated cost come from is like a $50,000 investment to the shelter itself, to put a roof over it, to make it more of an actual stop rather than
Benches and
benches. Yep.
Quick question. The demand for that bus stop would appear to be outweighed by the incline versus the COG. We heard that COG visitors tend to want to drive up to the location and so forth.
Historically, yep.
Incline users have been more amenable to the bus, and yet how do all the incline users get across that road without creating a
So currently, you know, it would be the exact same as current conditions. They get off there and then they walk across the Iron Springs up the, you know, few steps to the other side of, you know, Winter Street actually, and then continue up that incline. Yeah, your point is spot on that historically COG riders have not used the transit to the extent that the incline users do. You know, that is one of the reasons why we think that this is a very important piece to this overall solution. Is if we want to change that, we need to make it easier. We need to make it so that, you know, the families coming up for the COG can, you know, want to use the transit.
Gives limited mobility benefit to the COG. And just to clarify the costs, that 150 to 200 is the sidewalk, which is very expensive, and the shelter. It's not just the shelter.
Right, no, yeah. So yeah, 150 to 200 for almost everything, you know, in this package.
And there's no solution for the cross traffic of.
No, there would be a
pedestrians
crossing.
inclined.
There would be a signing and an alerting and a pedestrian cross signs. Those are very affordable, but no significant improvement.
To go across the property.
Right.
Pro-
Yeah.
property
To get
towards
across
traffic.
Winter Street and continue to use an easement that's there.
Yeah, I don't think there's actually an easement. So that, you know, if there needed to be an easement, that could be an additional cost on top of this. But yeah, this is just existing conditions essentially. And then the other alternative is to move the stop altogether. So this shows actually the stop is right here. This is the COG depot right in the center of the screen. Iron Springs is now on the right hand side and incline is shown at the top. So this is showing that the transit stop would move to just west of the COG depot. This alternative is more expensive for a variety of reasons that I can go into in a minute. But we want to highlight that $500,000 to $750,000 cost estimate assumes a joint venture where we can make things. You know, you get an easement from the COG, you work in a cooperative manner rather than trying to purchase the road, you know, their right of way or anything like that. This is a cooperative solution that
So
would
this goes
require
to your
both sides.
about parking on top of the hill. None of our solutions assume taking property, which that would require taking, and there's a whole damage and other things that we didn't want to go into, and it didn't meet the tenets of business, tourism, and visitors. So no, we did not look at eliminating all parking up there at all. But this one does have impacts.
And this one, as I said before, we have been in coordination with Ted and the COG, trying to make sure that this is something that they would at least look at, you know, and something that they could, you know, in anyone's imagination agree to. So, you know, we kind of got that go ahead.
And just for the record, they have not agreed to this.
No, but they agreed to.
They've agreed to let us design.
To look at it with,
They've agreed, they've given us the data. We never could have done this without their collaboration. They gave us the survey, they gave us the data. But just be clear, there's two options going forward, and that's a conversation between the COG and future information that comes out of this. We're not speaking on behalf of the COG. Ted can do that.
So, to talk to the pros and cons, the pros are, you know, this is an extreme improvement for rider experience for incline users as well as the COG itself, of being able to be dropped off at a essentially zero slope destination is an extreme experience improvement. You would no longer have to walk 2,000, 3,000 feet for either one of the attractions, as well as, like I said, there's essentially no slope issue at this point.
So let's walk them through with your mouse how the bus works.
Well, the other pro is that this solution we've designed and it would accommodate the larger tour buses. So the other pro is this could be a potential solution to remove any idling tour buses from the top of Ruxton. We've talked to the COG and they are interested in, you know, that aspect, in trying to find a different location, an off-site place for the tour buses to idle while their users are going up the COG. So that we think that that's actually a really big pro to no longer have that kind of going down Ruxton.
Do we even want those tour buses going up and down? That would be my question.
And we'd also talk to them about, you know, is there ways for us to have that system offload, at Hiawatha Gardens or something like that. Again, it's things that they're willing to talk about, but we need to make sure that it makes sense for everyone.
And it needs to be make business sense to them.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's a great idea,
Yes.
but then working collaboratively, because this solution requires land. And if they feel that the tour buses still need to drop off but not idle up there, and we get this without the tour, and having the tour buses on the corridor, that's a vast improvement to this not being a solution. Right? It's sort of weighing that negotiable piece.
Yeah, but we agree that would be, an excellent solution if everyone could come to agreement. So as Troy said, I'll try to go with my mouse. If you can see my mouse, I wish it was a different color. But so this is a transit bus. This is actually the larger tour bus shown, and then this next to it is a private auto. So the tour bus or transit would come up and then take a right into the COGS lot, and then do a turnaround essentially on what we think should be a dedicated, essentially, transit way, in an easement that is specific to the transit or the coach vehicle. Auto vehicles, we have shown, again, going with that same thought of utilities are moved, whether they're undergrounded or simply moved out of the way. We think that where there's parking now on street could become like a right-hand turn, essentially, for the queuing vehicles for the parking. And this shows that there is space for both of those to happen. A through lane that would service the transit vehicle as well as anybody trying to get up to the bar trail or the residence or anything like that. They would now, this doesn't, it's not a long enough queue lane to accommodate the entire parking lot, but it is, a 18 or 19 per, vehicle long queue lane that can help with congestion significantly. Auto vehicles would be expected to take a right, and then, whether they pay there or however, it's kind of up to the COG, and then they can kind of move about their business the way that they do now. We've got, we show some parking that gets replaced, and we show a total net loss for this, all the solution to be 25 spaces. So thinking, holistically, again, that those 25 spaces are tourist spaces that we would need to kind of accommodate some other way, whether that's, making sure we have those plus 25 at Hiawatha or however. But yeah, we think that this is a great solution. There are a number of cons though. As we alluded to, this requires private property impacts and honestly requires full negotiation of getting an easement from the COG and making sure that everyone's on the same page and everyone's happy with the end outcome. It requires those utility impacts of moving the existing hydrant and electric overhead. It proposes that the transit uses a private parking lot, which, in talking with Brian, he's not a fan of going through parking lots very often.
This is where we think a public easement is critical.
Except for when it's a dedicated transit way. That is, again, where we're trying to get through this collaboration. And then one of the other big cons are this does require a lot of improvements. The parking lots are never built to roadway standards, so they need to have a subgrade base improvement. It needs to have some pavement upgrades.
And that little low wall and rise at the entrance
That
would
may
be modified.
May need
in this design.
to be modified. So the observations from us based on those two, solutions that everyone has kind of agreed to are in some way can be negotiated. Both are viable. Both are improvements over existing condition. We assume that there is collaboration. We do not think that, especially solution 2, it basically cannot happen without a collaborative agreement with the COG. The cost of doing business that way, would be vastly different than that $500,000. Both alternatives are assumed to be regionally funded. They're both transit improvements, they're both pedestrian improvements. They would be well suited for a competitive grant of many kinds. They both fulfill alternative, or the expectations of the TMMP of a mobility hub. Both have, that bigger dedicated space that would have, maybe it's a bike share, maybe it's whatever, but there are space for both alternatives. We think that alternative 2, frankly, provides the better mobility solution for the Ruxton corridor. If we're about removing auto vehicles from the corridor, the best way to do it is to improve transit and pedestrian experience. Alternative 2 is clearly the winner in that regard. So our recommendation, the consultant recommendation, is alternative 2 if the agreement for the easement can be achieved and if cost can be some kind of regional solution, whether included in Ruxton or PPRTA grant or whatever it be. We think that if those two kind of caveats are taken care of, we think alternative 2 is by far the better option.
And the thing to think about is the financing of the COGS redevelopment or re-enhancement. And the financial agreement y'all went into already did not assume this additional.
Right.
Right, and so this is way beyond any business model they have, but the good news is we think this is a fantastic regionally competitive project, and all those design monies that the PPRTA gave you, the $1 million, there's always follow-up. And so this is where we want you to be a partner, and this could be easily eligible because nothing will resolve the mobility solution better than a dignified hub up at the COG.
So now, as Steven said, I can stop talking, and we would love your feedback, reaction, input as to the corridor itself and the mobility hub.
And then we do want, specific sort of guidance that you would like, because what we're scoped to do is now draw this out, specifically engineer it out to a conceptual level without survey, so we can get a reliable cost. It won't be the final design solution because we don't know where the parking is. But it is enough for you to budget and make a request to the PPRTA or whoever yourselves for the next level of effort. So that's what we're scoped to, only one. We can't draw 3.
You've got some additional slides there that you want to, was really your intent to discuss things, because I think we're gonna.
So yeah,
We only have 30 minutes
No,
left,
no,
we have to go
discuss
back
it.
to the
No.
mobility study
You wanna-
too.
Just really quick.
Okay, so
It's so small, we can't see.
that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. I'll describe it. So what's on the screen are those success measures from the TMMP, and we highlighted the ones that we think are applicable to this roadway. So the first one is transit ridership. The TMMP wants transit ridership to go up. This is, this corridor can absolutely impact that. Average daily traffic with the TMMP wants that to go down. Again, we can influence that directly with many of these solutions. Public perception of safety, all of the solutions in this roadway corridor address that. We believe that, as we said, the underlying improvement is safety and experience. And then the last one is resident perception of quality of life. As always, we have the 3 main, constituents of anything moving forward: the residents, the business owners, and the visitors. We want to make sure that any solution we propose has a net improvement to the quality of life of the residents. And then one last caveat.
This is a big if, but I want all to hear.
Looking back at, we want ADT to go down from a TMMP set. We think that if average daily traffic does not go down or continues to grow on Ruxton Avenue, that the city of Manitou Springs and the city of Colorado Springs should create an enforceable management plan for the incline and the BART trail. We believe that we think that our solutions will provide that net decrease in average daily traffic, but if it doesn't, the 2 cities should sit down and really consider what is actually enforceable and how do we really start to limit the number of people going out.
And the reason we make it vague here is that's something this Ruxton plan is out of scope to implement. We can't do it.
Right.
And it is a huge FTE, full-time equivalent employee question for both Colorado Springs and the city of Manitou Springs. We think, and we heard the community loud and clear, that the impacts of the users of the incline is a very negative on the quality of life of those residents. Rexton would love to be able to help you, so we are putting this in. Our metrics from physical design can only do so much. And this is a conversation that this cannot resolve. That the city has to decide in Colorado Springs, how do we enforce that? Is it our police? Is it Colorado Springs police? Way beyond our scope. But we heard our constituents and the participants in the study loud and clear, and we want to communicate to you. We think we have performance measures to improve their quality of life. If it doesn't, we do think very strongly working with Colorado Springs and how do you manage those two other amenities.
And not necessarily do the first and then figure it out later. We could do it both.
You can do that on your own pace. Our study can't address that. Right.
And then the other one was just what's next. It's the next steps for this project. But yeah, we want this discussion.
Great. Susan.
Yes, I just want to add that the Transportation Parking Board had their meeting this morning. Both Bill, the chair, and Valerie, board member, are here, and they plan to move forward with sharing with council that they would like to see the current bus stop moved, and there were a number of residents at that meeting this morning with a number of reasons. I just wanted to know if you guys want to elaborate on that.
Sure. The concern is the location of the bus stop right now. It's unacceptable to the local residents. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of, shall we say, trash and human remains lying around. The porta potty doesn't work. Even if it did, people don't use it. So there's been a lot of local resident concerns about this location. And also the question of, well, how do people get through? Do they walk through Brian's lot or wherever? And then people, if they want to use the shuttle to get to the COG, they're going to walk up this huge slope, which is what? Good, you guys say 12%?
No, it's like 20.
Oh no, it's
20%. 20%. It's an unrealistic location. We need to move it no matter what. That's the bottom line.
So, like the mobility study, this was funded in collaboration with the City of Colorado Springs. But the COG was an active participant. And I don't know if Colorado Springs wants to be reflective of this process and what your reaction was to this. Or if it was appropriate, obviously there's a major landowner that was actively involved. And just get their perspectives if you want.
Brian, do you have comments to make?
Yeah.
Or Kurt?
No, I'll let Kurt, I'll defer to Kurt, but I'll just echo what I said earlier. Again, this was a very collaborative process. The public engagement was overwhelming, and we heard from the residents and business owners and everybody involved loud and clear.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kurt Schroeder. I'm with Colorado Springs Parks Recreation Public Services, and I'm the Park Maintenance and Operations Manager. And I wasn't involved in the mobility study, but with the Ruxton functionality study I was. And having been in the business for 40 years and been through many planning processes and worked with many consultants, I've got to tell you, I was incredibly impressed with Kinley Horn, how they went about their work. I think you guys have received a terrific product, and the process, even more so than the product, I think was really, really excellent. I truly mean that. And really impressed with the effort they put into it, what they've just shared with you all tonight, and the options that is really, and you guys know it's a very, very difficult, challenging issue with all things Manitou and Ruxton in particular, with what I was involved with. So we were pleased with the outcome.
Any questions for Mr. Schroeder? Council?
Question.
Yes.
Going back to the incline users, what would preclude, given that bus route, actually having two stops? One for the incline people going up and coming back, hence they would not be crossing two roads, and also their walk is problematic because they're going across parking lots, they're going across, et cetera, et cetera. So the buses would go right by them as they're trying to cross the street. Why doesn't the bus just stop there? So you have a
on the uphill stop on the
Correct.
uphill slope.
Yeah.
So
On that-
it absolutely could. I think the consideration is you're stopping in now the flow of traffic to get up the hill to the cog. You are adding to that kind of queue of vehicles, as well as the bus would then, who would you expect to be on the lower side if everyone can get off up there? Why, I think at least my perspective would be if people are getting off of a public transit, I should be able to get on it, and I think you might have a confusion point. But I don't think there's a whole lot.
And I think our specific concern of not addressing that is there's a real tight line. There's a residential complex there, multiplex, that has driveways and there's right-of-way type. I think that should be addressed, and that's one of the things we could say as you go into final design, when you get that survey, it's a far more informed decision. Right now, we're sitting there, so we left it off.
just a challenge that
No, I agree. I think it's a great point.
I thought on the upward loop, the buses going into an easement through the back of the parking lot, that would not stop the main traffic. If the bus stop was in that vicinity, you would just have to find a way to get the incline users, it's basically a path over to that area of the parking lot.
You mean they go up that incline into the cog lot, and so immediately after the houses, you would take a right and go up that?
Right.
So
we did look at that.
we looked at that, and it's really steep, and you're going uphill, and it's from a relatively slow position, and I suppose, from a candid perspective, if you wanted to do that, it's very difficult for the transit bus, and then I would think that would probably preclude any electric bus, for the foreseeable future. You would not have that option to go to electric if you had to go up that very
big incline.
steep incline.
And the other
because
thing
kills
is,
the battery.
it really fundamentally changes how the parking lot works for the cog.
Absolutely.
Fundamentally, so much so that it was hugely disrupted. And so we veered away from that. The charrette certainly looked at it, but we veered away for those reasons.
It was one of those post-process, can we make it work? And there was a lot of reasons why we weaned it out. I thought you meant stop right there as the why happens.
It just strikes me we do need to spend more time on it.
Right.
It just strikes me there's the potential for a space.
Yes.
So you have
It's unfortunate. The grades were just too unreal.
Council, any other questions? Comments? No, good.
I didn't see a lot of bike except in one solution. And given that we're looking at an e-bike, bike share, are you proposing that at this mobility hub that there be a station for e-bikes?
Absolutely.
I think that's a great possibility.
It's completely up to the city, up to, the landowners. We think that, as you said, e-bikes are specifically, kind of enticing to the Ruxton corridor. With both of the trail options, the solution 2 and 3, it's kind of a city policy on how wide the sidewalk would have to be to allow those vehicles. But yeah, I think both of those could accommodate.
Another thing about electric vehicles is they can operate at speeds very comparable with what we're experiencing on the corridor today.
Okay.
So at 20 miles an hour, those things can easily go 20 miles
So
up those hills
They can just as easily widen
in the travel lane. That's where, I think the only option that they're accommodated is option 3. Because in option 2, I'd say put them in the street. And I feel comfortable as a traffic professional that those electric assist bikes could easily be safe and comfortable in those travel lanes. I don't know, because they've been such a collaborative partner throughout this, I don't know if the COG would want to speak anything on this Ruxton effort.
Mr. Johnson?
Putting you on the spot.
If you come up to the microphone again, please.
Yeah, so again, we've
Ted, could you say your name?
Ted Johnston, Cog Railway. So again, this has been another issue, or not issue, but area where we've been very collaborative with the Kinley Horn team. We've provided them survey that we've already had done at tremendous cost to get done. When they first approached us about this and said, there's a potential we could take your private or use your private property, we didn't bat an eye when giving them the go ahead. I mean, I think it was within an hour I had an approval to move forward. And, all I can commit to right now is that we will agree to work with the Ruxton study moving forward. Obviously, there are some very deep concerns with us losing at least 25 parking spots possibly. Is there a way for us to possibly get those back? I don't know. But we are right now at least we haven't said stop by any means. So, and if we are working towards this goal, I don't think this is something that, as Troy touched on earlier, we want to dive into right away. Even though right now might seem like the perfect time to do it with all the construction that's going on. But I think what we need to do, is this is slated for what, 3 years, 3 years down the road?
Right, through the design process.
Design process. That gives us time to also test the waters on all the technology that we're going to be trying to implement as we reopen and see if it's working. And is it driving people to use transit? And if we're seeing the vast majority of our customers using transit as they come up to the COG, we want to provide them the best experience possible. I mean, I'm kind of in Kyle's shoes when it comes to walking up that incline from the current bus stop. I don't want to do it. I sure, want our customers to have a pleasant experience. And, it just is something that we definitely got to see more data, make sure that it is justified. And I will say, if we are going to have a bus stop built right there adjacent to our depot, we don't want a bus shelter. We want something that conforms to the historical architecture of our building up there. That's something that we hold very true. We're looking at an addition up there. We were told, based from our owner, who everybody knows who he is, that everything we do up there building-wise will conform to the architectural style. And we had no plans to get away from that. But that's just how deep that architectural style means to us.
And so one thing I didn't highlight earlier, in that 500 to 750,000 for the alternative to at the depot, it does include a bigger cost for the station. That includes like a $250,000 investment in just that stuff to accommodate architectural design, to accommodate some more grandiose, desire of it's not a transit stop. That would really be, the spot that people would be going to.
So what we would recommend to council is both alternatives go forward into final design. The two mobility hubs. We would have these draft comments so that you can get more information and work that solution with the COG if alternative 2 gets realized. The only way you're going to realize that is through more detailed design and cost estimate the final design. So if you scope the final design effort, we would make a recommendation that both be advanced with one roadway concept.
So Council, I think it seems to me like one of the things we need to do is get some direction on what we like, for instance, solution 1, solution 2, solution 3. What we like the COG station, we like alternative 1, alternative 2. So do we have a feeling for that? Mr. Shield?
Yes, I guess I was wondering whether there's a possibility of what I'm going to call a solution 1.5. Okay, which is, I'm intrigued with the 10-foot pedestrian right away in solution 2, but can we keep the parking on the solution 1 side of the street?
Keep it on the south side?
Yes.
We can look at it.
I guess to me that would be my preferred thing, because it seems like to me if we we don't end up, I think, with sort of kind of parking crisis that I perceive will develop in solution 2. And it seems like to me later, as you say, 10, 20 years down the road, if we want to shift the parking, okay, it seems like the right of way is there. It's just essentially almost relining the street and that type of thing. That's great. So I guess that would be my suggestion to the solution 1, solution 2 thing. And then to me, it seems like really, I think we ought to really just, instead of spending a whole bunch of design money to look at alternative 1, it seems like to me that if the COG is interested in seriously looking at alternative 2, I think we ought to just try and figure out how to just put as many marbles on that roulette wheel there. Seems like to me that's really the future. It's really where we need to go. And to me, it feels like to me we burn through easily $100,000 and $150,000 in alternative study for design 1, alternative hub 1, when in reality it seems like to me that's not really what we want. I think we have to me it seems like some of the parking spaces in the area can go back to sort of the general pool up there by moving the hub in terms of where it is right now down there by the Iron Spring in some way. It probably isn't close to 25. And then maybe there's some questions about, can we squeeze that down so that the COG doesn't lose that many parking spaces? And really, work on that element of it. So that's my thoughts. 1.5 and alternative 2 for the hub.
The main thing you lose by shifting the parking, go back to the roadway, is that buffer,
I get it, but to me, it's like 10 feet, that's pretty nice. Okay?
Yeah. And at the speeds we're talking about, we can come up with a solution.
And to me, with the goal of trying to also really manage those speeds down to 20, to me, I don't think, traffic moving uphill, okay? My perception as somebody who walks up Ruxton probably 3 days a week, every single day of the week, every week of the year, rain, snow, or whatever, is people are not really, the speed is the downhill side of the thing. To me, I think tourists and whatnot that are going up there where we really have demand issues on that, to me, I think that street has got enough sort of kind of eye candy and stuff in terms of where am I, what's going on, where is this station, where's the incline and the whole 9 yards, that I think that's enough distraction, I think, for most people not to be pushing 28 going up the hill.
Yeah, that's great. I think that the speed study showed like 24, 25 up there, like about
28 was the down.
Yeah.
It was slower.
Yeah, exactly. So those are my thoughts.
Those are good thoughts to begin with, and it sounds like you guys are feeling like John's ideas are doable, the 1.5 and the alternative 2.
And frankly, the concern is the adjacent traffic sidewalk, but we could do a different color concrete for a two foot gap up to 10. So they still have 10 physical feet, but then they have a 2 foot different color. So 8 and 2, which works. And what I like about that is it doesn't get to the full aspirational option 3, but it certainly makes it really close. And it's just a paint job, right? It's just a paint job in the future. And that's what's intriguing to me is that paint job is very affordable.
What were the cross sections, just real quick on my question in terms of just dovetailing on that of number 3, in terms of the sidewalk?
So number 3 showed a 10-foot trail
Plus the buffer.
Plus like a 4.5-foot tree lawn essentially.
No, I guess what I'm asking is so.
Oh, on the south
so
side.
What happens to in this thing here?
where does that parking stuff go? Does it mainly go to the south side or to the quote north side?
So currently, it kind of goes to the north side. So existing, or solution one is close to existing. You have about between a 4 and a 6 foot sidewalk on the south side, and that stays in solution 3. Where the parking is on the south side, the roadway would kind of get shifted there to the south side, and you would gain this 8 feet of parking essentially on the north side. That's what solution 3 shows.
So you would result in probably a 2-foot concrete ribbon on the south side, on-street parking, 2 travel lanes, and then your 10-foot trail. But then that could flip, right? You put the parking in the future on the other side, and that's the slow reduction. South has more parking. When you move it north 20 years from now, you reduce that number. But then you could very easily chisel out those on-street parking spaces at no cost, because it's not going to affect drainage, and put in landscape or other amenities where the parking is, say, 50 years from now, as those land use change over time.
Your thoughts on this?
I do. I mean, I agree with John that I really don't want to see a lot more money spent on designing something that is too radical for us. I like the idea in general of starting slowly, seeing how it goes, and not getting too carried away all at once. That's all I have to say.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I totally agree on the hub to cyber solution. It's the way to, hopefully we can come to a good agreement and partnership with the COG. I'm sure we can actually. I of course prefer solution 2 of the parking thing with the ability to move to solution 3. But if you can assure me that option 1 could actually make it to 3 as well, I could go along with that. But I tend to be an aspirational person, and the solution 2 just, I think, is certainly more in line with what we want to do than solution 1. But anyway.
Yes, solution 2 definitely transitions to 3 easier.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
May I ask Nancy a question? So I'm very concerned with 2. May I touch your screen?
Let me touch your screen.
With 2, I was just concerned about the impact on the residents who live there,
and you're talking about parking. Yeah, and my sense is that parking 2, or solution 2, would only lose paid tourist parking, not resident parking, and I would put that as a condition.
Yeah, I wish I had more data. If we knew that there is a need for exactly 75 parking spaces, if we assume 2 spaces per household, which is probably low, but whatever, and then we know how many households. And then we know that if we do like an RPP and it's no tourist parking at all, it's residential, it would be fine. But I don't have that information. I just
Right, and I think that would come with the design. I mean, we're at just on a very high level at this point in time, just general design. And I also, ultimately like the idea, the aspirational stuff in solution 3 of looking at surface, additional options for surface parking. Ultimately, that may not be the best thing, because I think my sense is that the future of transportation is going to be less in parking and more in other transportation modes. So, but yeah, I would put that in as a condition that we get the data to demonstrate that it's not going to impact resident parking. And hopefully more and more residents will be using public transport.
Well, that ain't gonna happen for a long time.
Right, well,
Our public
yeah.
transport is horrible. So,
Yeah, that's what
realistic.
the mobility study is trying to get. So it's an evolution. It's definitely an evolution. Sorry. Yeah.
So, I love it when I hear that we really are keeping the interests of our residents paramount, but sometimes it doesn't feel that way to me. Sometimes, as a resident of Manitou, I feel like we are paid lip service, and really the tourists and their needs seem to supersede us. And so I want to be very mindful about that as we proceed. I don't live on Ruxton Avenue, but my daughter and my granddaughter lived there for 2 years, and I can tell you that during the winter, when I would drive my car up to visit them, often I couldn't find parking to visit my own family. So I live on Becker's Lane, where during tourist season, tour buses barrel up my street, and Adventures Out West barrels up my street, and the trolley car barrels up my street, and they have the Audible going. So I want to be very mindful that, yes, we have these great tourist attractions at the top of our hill, but we have Ruxton Avenue, and so I am a fan. I like the Councilman Shada's idea. I like solution 2. I like the idea of we need to bury those. That's a given. We need to move beyond that. I want to see us have some parking up there and move in the direction of not having traffic up there. But I like the idea of maintaining some parking spaces and also putting some landscaping up there. Hello, trees, wouldn't that be nice? So I like that idea. And Ted, you answered one of my questions about the hub, that you guarantee that it's going to be aesthetically pleasing and it's going to fit in with the aesthetics of the COG. That made me feel a little better about that. I'm a fan of number 2 and Councilman Shada's 1.5 on the as far as the hub. I do want to just say one thing about roundabouts. I really like roundabouts. They're very aesthetically pleasing and they slow traffic. And I'm a fan of them if they're economically worthwhile. But in this particular case, just thinking about the roundabout, when we're spending money, the traffic up there up to the COG is really not an issue. If that roundabout can't accommodate emergency vehicles, buses, and so on, I'm just wondering, I'm just throw this out as an idea, is it really financially worth our time to put a roundabout in there when we're looking to spend our dollars elsewhere? So that's just something I want to throw out there. So those
a clarifying question on that.
Sure.
My sense was it would still accommodate emergency vehicles as they go up.
Yes, it's just,
They
yeah,
will-
they turn
they can't
around.
go
and
left.
turn
They
around.
can't turn around.
They would do that
So
above
to
the
keep
car.
them, so they still have to keep going. So I'm just throwing. I mean, I'm not opposed to them, but when we're spending city dollars, I'm just putting it out there. Is that something that's necessary? Really necessary in the big scheme of things? But so that's my input.
Councilman Todd.
Yes, in summary, the bus stop move up to the second location of the COG Railway got my support. I like the progressive idea of 1 to 3 and Councilman Shade's proposal 1.5. I think the underground question is a big deal, something to get started on right away. Is I would understand that we would only want to do that if we were simultaneously doing sewer work, electric work. I'm not sure what the water utilities are. That's a major interruption to the roadway, not something to do 3 years out, something to do yesterday. So I think really getting on top of that and what's the cost and what's the financing of it. Hopefully it's a bundled deal where the sewer can carry the majority of excavation costs and the electric lines are just kind of an add-on to the side. But it's important to solve that. And the point I raised earlier, I really don't see putting all this investment in and having inclined people again going across traffic and finding their own way through some kind of imaginary maze to get to the bus stop. I just don't see that as being worthy of the whole investment. Another solution, I believe, needs to be found there for inclined users.
My turn. So basically, I like alternate 2, consistent with same reasons as what's already been mentioned. I like solution one. You know, I think there's a lot of value in exploring solution 1.5. I'm real reluctant to take away parking off Ruxton. It's precious. My grandparents lived there for 50 years. They never had on-street parking. I had a business across the street. We depended on commercial parking. I have seen a lot of contention between the neighbors at times. So I don't think Manitou is quite ready to move in that direction. The value again, 1.5, if we make a transition later on, if our behaviors change, well, that would be nice. Again, the scope's 50 years out. I'm not as worried. It's what's going to happen in the next 15 months within the condo. So we've got some critical issues there. But I think in general, it's impressed with the work you guys have done. Appreciate that. Appreciate also the recognition that you gave and that the incline, I think, needs to be managed. That's a huge traffic situation we have to contend with. So, do we have any go backs?
I guess one other comment I'd like to make is I think we ought to bring the whole incline issue. I think the consultants made some comments that was sort of kind of some contingency that somehow or another things didn't, I don't know how you guys kind of.
If it didn't worsen was our phrase.
Yeah, and I think we ought to be just a lot more proactive about that particular issue on the front end instead of just kind of shoving that under the carpet. Because I think we need to get a really clear management plan and communicate to the community in terms of just how much capacity is there in that recreation asset, where are they parking, how are they getting there, the whole 9 yards. And I think we ought to just get over that and just shove that right up there to the front of the pile.
Sounds good.
I second
I mean, I don't think it's, I think by delaying it, I think it may actually impact things like Solution 2 and things like that, or the viability of it, or even the how the COG perceives that health point being used simultaneously. I think we need to work all those issues out instead of waiting until there's like a big, huge problem up there.
Can I ask one other?
I don't see any reason to delay it.
A related question I don't know the answer to is, we had that 5G presentation, the internet thing, and they were talking about undergrounding versus not undergrounding. So it'd be nice if we can coordinate that as well, so we don't have them re-tearing up the streets or putting up these in-the-way posts after we've come up with this expensive solution. Right. And I realize they can do whatever they want, unless and until the city promulgates its own ordinance, which it hasn't done yet, I guess.
No, I think we have.
We have the ordinance, so it's
that.
in place.
Yeah.
Does it say anything in there about undergrounding versus not?
Well, I don't think it maps per se for 5G, but I think one of the things that by leaving all that overhead infrastructure just sets us up for then just tacking all that stuff on the existing.
So that we could show them, hey, this is the deal.
Exactly.
And coordinate that so
Absolutely.
that we don't keep tearing things up repeatedly up the
Right.
road.
Karen.
Just a minute. Karen, can you be quick?
Yeah, I'm Karen Berthold.
If you want to come up, please.
I'm sorry?
You can come
Oh,
up.
so you can be on the speaker.
More ways than one.
And I just wanted to share a little bit more information about utilities. So I've been assisting Joel Rednick in public works with transportation projects, and just today interviewed with CSU and started preliminary discussions with utilities. And so it's the intention to get the utilities work done before the COG opens in May. And there are some very intensive services in the corridor. There's a very large electric line bringing the hydropower down, an almost 3-foot raw water line, gas main. So I'm not completely clear clear on what this involves, but I know that the utilities is part of the design project, the rest of the $1 million. So it does involve mapping, and as I understand it, looking at how all the utilities interact, the layers through the road, probably supplementing some of the utilities in place, such as the electric, and figuring out where the overhead would go. I don't know if the full overhead can be incorporated, but at least the preliminary planning in terms of creating the channels and advanced planning to do that part. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, that's a good point, Kelly. Definitely want to get that done before we start. Fresh asphalt.
Yeah, I think Joel sees the utilities as much more impactful than the actual road work itself, so that's.
I don't think you could put an addendum on your report, mentioning the utilities or.
So the utilities would definitely highlight them in the report. We have talked to CSU a bit. I got to go talk to some of their electric and their field engineers with actually some Manitou staff. Dole was there with me. So we kind of tried to get some of that, trying to get franchising agreements understood, and just get everyone moving in the same path. But yes, we'll definitely highlight that, phasing of the final thing will be extremely important. As you said, 3-year, 5-year projects are, easily taken up by coordination and trying to get everyone on the same page.
Good. Probably my last question would be probably to Laura and Denise. Could we get to maybe like a little spreadsheet as to what these things might cost, just on one sheet of paper, so council can look at it and compare what the recommendations are, what it would cost and who might pay for it, or something like that?
From the Transportation and Mobility Master Plan,
Right.
those top 5
Yes,
recommendations.
the top 5 recommendations, yeah.
Yes.
Just so we can kind of figure out if we've got the money, what we need to find it, if that comes down to it.
With potential funding sources perhaps
That would be my thought.
recommended. And may I ask, when we return on the 18th for presentation with that spreadsheet, would it be appropriate to have a resolution prepared to adopt the Transportation and Mobility Master Plan? Or am I putting the cart ahead of the horse?
It needs to be adopted at that length if possible, and it would go by resolution.
Council, any thoughts on that?
What's the benefit of doing it right away versus later? I just don't know the pros and cons.
I would just say that it's a plan, and it's a roadmap, no pun intended, for how we move in the future, and start choosing options. So I know that they've got some of the cost estimates, or at least order of magnitude cost estimates in the plan for these options, and we don't have to implement anything. So I don't feel a need to hold up adopting the plan because we don't have exact cost estimates at this point.
Yeah, I think by the nature of, if I may, Mayor, by the nature of a transportation master plan, it's equivalent to Plan Manitou. It is the supply side of the city's transportation system. And the comp plan is the land use or the demand side of the transportation system. And it is aspirational and policy based. It's not budget based. And what you need is, as consultants or your staff identify projects and scope projects forward, they would be required to meet the expectations of the community. So you then would get a reliable budget number. Without a master plan, you won't. You'll get value engineering that doesn't necessarily follow the tenets of the master plan. And so without that master plan, the subsequent implementation of specific items can fall short, and you'll get unpredictable, because you might get the community outrage after you've scoped something that's not matching this plan, that when they actually go to budget conversations, you're not buying what you thought you bought. And that's the value of the master plan.
If I could also say that having a plan in place allows you to go after money.
Exactly.
And
You're far more competitive.
Yeah, yeah.
Far more competitive.
So preparation for next meeting would be that one page of the recommendations pulled from the plan, perhaps with some more detail to it. No, not this plan, the mobility plan, as well as a prepared resolution for adoption of the transportation and mobility master plan as is? Or is there any?
I think we've asked some follow-on questions here too.
Yeah, I think on the mobility side, if I can suggest it, while it was great having those 5 big strategic items, I understand that. I'd like to see some low-hanging fruit identified. So for example, with our bus system, it seems like what we've been talking about is more frequent buses. I heard the term that when you get to the bus stop, the bus is there. So higher circulation means smaller buses. I'd like to see something about that. I'd like to see something about the safety audit of the intersections. The bottom line, council is responsible for the public safety. It's one of the primary things. And yet that safety audit wasn't really listed in terms of, here's the go-ahead near-term plan. So I don't want to spend any more time identifying low-hanging fruit because that wasn't an exercise done. Right. But I'd like to see that when you come back. What are the low-hanging fruit items that can be quickly done, visibly done, inexpensively done, to show results to our residents for the study? I think it's really important to do that. It starts to shift the culture of the city, starts to shift our awareness as residents, as business owners, etc. I agree with that.
And actually, if there's anything we could do this summer that would kind of let us test an idea before we get more involved implementation, that would be a thought too.
Well, if we the smaller shuttles, I would assume you need more of them.
Yeah, I was going to say that may be an incredibly large, not low hanging, but way up there that you can't aspire to right off the bat.
Just make a suggestion is that I think the plan is very good, and I think it would be appropriate to adopt the plan, have staff come back with recommendations on what, some of those low hanging fruit things were, a balanced approach. I don't see a need to do a lot more with the plan at this point. And of course I'm a lot more familiar with it than probably everybody else because I've been attending all the meetings, to include all the community meetings on it. So to me, we have a plan now, so it's incumbent upon staff and us to determine what we want to pick out of that plan and move forward with. And there are, if memory serves me, there are some very good charts in there to show what's quick things to do quickly and things to do long term, as well as again the relative order of magnitude of costs for them. So it gives us an opportunity to go in and kind of pick out what we want to do this summer or 5 years from now.
So based on what we've told you, is this sufficient feedback for you to?
We believe we can come back with a draftable or a resolution worthy master.
Okay. Council, any final questions for these gentlemen? For Laura?
And you'll also come back with the cost information that.
Their order of magnitude is in here, and then your questions will come addressed.
So we good? Okay, all right.
If I may, I'll just. I just want to say, we certainly, City of Colorado Springs, Cook Schroeder, recognize and appreciate the concerns many have, all have, some have about the incline, but I just wanted to point out the steps that you're taking here with the functionality study and the mobility plan will probably serve to address some of those things. And if you look at the master management plan for the incline, the process that was gone through however many years ago, they kind of anticipated this and laid out as a goal or a task, like a better term, of magnitude to investigate and look at seriously these types of things with transportation and of all sorts up and down Ruxton. And so you congratulate, because that was a major component of that plan. And that's a box that can be checked through this effort that's going to help, hopefully, alleviate some of those other issues and concerns that you may have with the incline and other things that we can then move forward and work on.
But I fully anticipate though that we would still need a management, it doesn't excuse us from addressing a meaningful management plan for the incline, because I think it's the consensus of the community that it's way overused, too many people per day, it's just crazy. So even though we're making strides in this direction, I would hope we would simultaneously and as soon as possible address the incline management.
Sounds good. All right. You know what you need? Yeah. Great, thank you. Thank you all for your participation and attention.
I have a question.
Oh, we're not done? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, exactly, that's all right. Three over
Yeah, sorry. Even a little.
Council, we've still got a couple short pieces to do. So.
I'll talk to them.
Okay.
Okay, so now we will entertain item D, which is receive council correspondence.
I have several, but I'll go fast. I was asked by constituents to remind everybody that the cause of conditional use, first hearing of the planning commission is the 12th of February. I also got this council correspondence, which is super cool. It's from the Housing Advisory Board. And I just wanted to point out that this is a good thing to share with your neighbors, especially in my ward. There's a lot of properties that can really use this. So I don't know how many people saw this in their mailbox, but it's a good thing for all of us to continue to share. Parking revenues in December were up over last December. It may be one of the best Decembers ever. I think they were up about 32%. In December, we had a busy December. I think there was a lot of turnover. So I think that's good news. You're going to see, hopefully, we'll have parking revenues to report next meeting. I think you're going to see 2019 way ahead of 2018. And keep in mind, there were some major things that happened. One, we started 2018 with the Park Avenue Bridge not working in that street, not using that parking. We made adjustments last year to the bar trail rates, which are going to make our revenue numbers higher. And also some other changes on Rexton where we encourage spaces to be more utilized. So, and we were busy too, and that's all part of it. But there's really 4 kind of big reasons that parking revenues are going to be higher in 2019 than they were in 2018. At the Parking Authority Board this morning, Waltham, RPP will be coming forward to council. There was 60-something% that wanted it, 20-something% that did not. So we'll be hearing from that as a council to make that decision. Let's see. Sorry, I have a lot this time. I don't know if anybody else listened to the Council on Foreign Relations call today, but it really plays into what we discussed here tonight. It was all about energy and climate change, and they talked about transportation a lot, and they had some really bold ideas, including cities not charging for public transportation, finding another way to fund that, because most of the people who use public transportation can't really even afford that. And so that was something that was pretty boldly talked about as a future, and many cities are already experimenting with this. And they also had other bold ideas like driverless buses, buses on demand. And so as we look at these plans today, I just want to point out that we're really looking at them through a lens that works for 2020. And there's going to probably be some major changes in transportation. And that's something to think about as we move forward. And we start trying to get matching funds. But we really definitely tonight talked about the way we live today. And this call, and I definitely encourage, and I'll email all of you, these calls that they do every 2 weeks, the Council on Foreign Relations are just kind of mind-blowing. And it's all of the United States. It's anything from governors and senators to city council members like you and I, but it really gives you a lot to think about, and I think that's everything I had.
Great. I have nothing.
Just an update, I, 3-hour meeting last night with OSAC, and most of it was going over many topo maps, and thank you to Dylan for putting that together to get trail signage put together, and then we also discussed working with the tree planting group to plant some trees along the Kinsman Trail, where that new area Kinsman Trails, going up and to put the trees there. So we're going to be meeting in February with Allie, the arborist, and myself, and a member of OSAC to go up there and plan that whole project. And I think that's all I have.
One item to hand out, just something to take home. Now, there's discussion here, West Council correspondence. Last week when we passed the mock ordinance first reading, I committed to having a resolution regarding implementation. It's a one-page resolution. Actually, the second page is for signatures. And that'll be in the council packet with good graces of our city administrator and city clerk on Friday, so the public will have that prior to our next meeting. Plan there.
Yeah, I just got a couple things. Mayor Pro Tem, Fortune and I met yesterday and talked a little bit about how we thought the MAC proposal might go forward. So, and she typed it up, so we'll get that in the packet for this kind of moved, and then we'll probably augment to Councilman Todd's work. I met with David Jenkins this afternoon, and he's proposing this is a bronze statue, I'll pass it around here, of Rocky. So it's a memorial statue of Rocky, which he is championing. It actually started, the idea started earlier last year.
Moreland. He's not done it yet, is he?
No, he hasn't.
So very incredible.
So I think he said the price would be about $175,000 to $180,000. He can raise most of the money on his own. He would seek some participation from City of Manitou and approval to put the statue in the library. I think more when we hand this off to the Creative District, I guess the Arts Council.
Maybe you can ask for some of the match money.
Well, that's a possibility, I suppose. But anyway, just wanted to call that to your attention and I'll forward it on to the Creative District.
Not familiar with David Jenkins.
David Jenkins, real estate developer active in Colorado Springs. Norwood.
Oh, he's part of the Norwood.
He is
one of the Jenkins
He's
space.
Mr. Norwood.
Oh, the senior guy.
Yeah, and his son is little Mr. Norwood.
Yeah, right.
Chris. So Chris.
Got it.
Sure. So anyway, he until about 11 years ago lived here in Maine.
Yeah. No, I know.
So he seems to have strong affinity for Maine. So that's all I've got. City administrator.
So we had the parking board meeting this morning. I thought it went well, and we are working on a little bit of low-hanging fruit, which is the signs and for the parking, the digital signs. We're looking at pricing, and so we are working on some things with that. Also, we get a few calls about the MAPS project on the west side of town and some parking concerns. So I'll be dealing with that this week and seeing what their concerns are. And finally, Mrs. Wolf, you asked about the data for Ruxton on parking. We can get you data. SD Plus has all that data. So if anyone needs parking information on how many parking spaces, we can get that data.
Oh, well, that might be helpful to know as we go forward.
Okay, so I'll talk to Kevin and we'll do that. All right, that's all I have.
And I just have a few, the mayor and I met this morning with CSU, and we did talk about the all the items that need to be done along Ruxton and to see if we can move those up quicker rather than later. So we had a great conversation and asked for that. I attended the chamber meeting and was able to talk to him about what was happening in the city, which was great. We met with Briargate today, or Briarhurst today, and they were also interviewing for the planning director, and then of course the all-day retreat.
Is CSU considering, were you meeting with them regarding undergrounding, or was it some other subject?
It's the whole, to replace that water main and moving did that, we would hope for underground and hopefully put cable in, which would be ideal. It would be, crazy for somebody not wanting to do it, and to do our wastewater at the same time. So if we could do it all at once, but we'd have to get started very quickly, and we have to get moving. They did not have it in their capital, we don't have it in our capital, so it's kind of a readjustment if we can make things happen.
And it would be to our advantage in the COGS to have it done before May of next year.
Yeah.
Obviously.
And what was the purpose of the visit with the fire crews?
We just went to talk to them to see about, one, to do the introduction, but also just to see about what they're doing for, selling, how that's going, those type of things, and what they're looking at. So it was just kind of an introduction.
We had some thoughts about the future use of the property. I mean, they'd mentioned long ago, somebody thought about turning it into an RV park, and so you're asking to try and keep a restaurant or something.
Yeah. We've been going around and meeting with various business owners, and so with Firehurst being up for sale, we were just kind of touching base.
Just on that kind of question, square those kind of introductions. Cheyenne Village wasn't a market pending sale, heard through rumor mill, the pending sale did not go through. With his introduction also, there would be helpful.
It's, Housing Advisory Board has been working on that, and it's currently, to my knowledge, it's still under contract with due diligence due by, I think, April.
Thank you, that's great.
Okay. This meeting's adjourned.
So when are we supposed to address this resolution that Bob just handed out? Is that scheduled for anything?
So are you going to send me the next one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There were a whole bunch of stuff that we would it's not on microbites, and it's about Tuesday.
Yeah, that's about time on Tuesdays.
Yeah, what also is what,
I know very little, I knew that Shelley.
they also, I think what extends around.
So, sure.
So that.
Shelley and people.
I don't know if there's any.
Oh, I see. When you said Tom Mack or not, I wasn't sure what that was.
No electric
To
tech,
see
but
if
it's
there's,
there.
yeah. I'm one of the people I know that,
Yeah,
either way, I see pros and cons of both.
A few years ago, it's been a long tradition. It's total rain around there. Rouse's Trail is, and Trail. That was one of the reasons that.
If you have 10 fair people who are all in favor of the expansion, then it's you already know what their recommendations are. And then do you stack it with half and half, so they have to fight to come up with a compromise?
So, and is Gary Michael still on that? He wasn't there. Okay. Gary Michael has this. It's just that he's been on this forever. I don't know if I want it.
Yes.
But he's got, he had a couple other
I've got a.
looked at around. I thought they, that's been.
I still have one.
Oh, you don't want to do that.
It was mentioned on Saturday that Mark Strong
Yeah.
That's fabulous.
And the other
That's the marginalized everything's always subject to change.
Right.
Thanks, Chief.
So that's, that was still very robust.
Nor would you want it. Nor would you want it.
3 hours.
I said, I would want.
Especially with
Go on
I love
record
my
that.
dearly, but oh my god.
Mr. Gentleman.
Oh, that's
You
good.
go off.
I have
Well,
a number of.
you want me to hear what that.
When I
You
was
want me to hear
chair,
what
Mike
that.
Shelley, and he was vice chair, and Mike and I would have lunch monthly.
Go on.
Really committed.
Oh, I'm locked down in there.
I can't thank you for that. Which is very helpful, but.
So the only thing I can get into is the city.
Yeah, it's start.
Yes, I have no idea how to do that.
Everyone have a good rest of the.
I was told you would make me get that.
I know.
So maybe I should just
like
talk
some
to
jigsaw
someone.
puzzle.
Why?
Well, because my friend Susan gave me a gift of a puzzle. And it's had all their laser wood jigsaw puzzle, and the pieces are.
Do I turn it off? Sorry.
The pieces are extraordinary. I mean, it's just a worst, it's a mind bender, is so it's called.
Oh my god.
But once you start it, it's
Get it done in advance.
Right.
So why don't you just use your password?
We're still on Facebook.
It's still streaming.
So I think probably it'd be worth getting the